My British Empire. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 326 Black Slave. The sky was getting dark, and the hot sun had spread out for a day. After a very long stay, I finally had to return to my residence, but the quiet town was still very lively due to the gradual prosperity of commerce. The trade in the whole of England is extremely prosperous, so His Majesty the King obeyed the people's will and abolished the long-standing night ban that existed in name only, thus making the night markets in the whole of England extremely prosperous. Of course, a prosperity is the same as before, and it is still limited to a certain street, but the prosperity of business is still felt by the English. For example, in Papa's Tavern, even though the interior is brightly lit, customers who are used to going to bed early at night still gradually choose to leave, but there are still many people staying in Papa's Tavern, some drunken alcoholics, and the enthusiastic audience gathered together around a fire pit with burning wood. Completely drive away high. Let me tell you, yesterday, at the port, a large cargo ship came, but what is strange is that there is no cargo on the entire ship. Guess what is on board? A thin man with an obscene figure, red nose and macy hair drank a glass of wine happily, licked his lips, and glanced at the eager eyes of the people sitting around him. As soon as this strange topic was brought up, it immediately aroused the interest of many customers, all of whom stretched their necks and stared at him eagerly. Say it. Say it, I'm so anxious. A burst of urging from the crowd made him feel more at ease. Originally, I was also full of doubts. I stretched my head and looked up vigorously. After waiting for a long time, I was sure that there was no cargo on the deck. The doubts in my heart became stronger. He lifted his chin and looked at the disgustingly arrogant eyes. Think about it. Such a big ship, without any cargo, is going to die at a loss? Only a fool would do such a loss-making business. As soon as the voice fell, there was a burst of echoing from the side. That's right. How could there be such a fool? He probably would have died long ago. It must be important cargo, very important, and I don't want us to see it. It can't be a ship of gold. It must be sent. The sound of discussion made the atmosphere of the whole tavern even more lively. People were discussing with each other endlessly, and everyone's curiosity about this strange thing was immediately ignited. After the tavern gradually quieted down, the thin man sitting in the middle took a big sip of the cloudy drink in his hand leisurely, and continued talking. I was also curious. I haven't seen such a thing for a long time, so I stood there with my head stretched out. When it was almost dark, the cargo ship finally made a noise. Speaking of this, the thin man's mouth suddenly stopped, making the audience around him so angry that they wanted to curse. When it was mostly dark, the cargo ship finally made a commotion. A sailor in canvas came out, looked around for a while, and seemed to notice that there were not many people in the port, and then made a movement. At this time, a group of figures slowly came out of the cabin, naked without a single piece of clothing on their bodies, but the strange thing is that I couldn't see the specific appearance of their faces. It was pitch black, and the whole body was pitch black. One slice. When the word black was mentioned, the man emphasized it twice, and he continued after everyone showed astonishment in their eyes. If I didn't find out that they have a pair of frighteningly white teeth, I really thought they were wood. As he spoke, he couldn't help sighing, with an expression of emotion on his face. There are still people who are all black but don't look like autumn, the devils who don't go back to hell, a fat man said in surprise, with a hint of fear on his face. How is it possible? If it was a devil, the angel would have come out long ago. This is impossible. A guy with a little knowledge immediately began to refute and criticize righteously. Finally, I asked the owner of the ship and realized that it was captured from a desert continent below Portugal. The tall and thin man put on a disdainful face for everyone's speculation, and then he said loudly, after feeling that everyone ignored him, this group of people with black bodies and sparse hair all come from that continent. It is said that this group of people only spent some iron on them, and they got it. I reckon that there must be at least 100 of them, all strong, but good slaves, and the group of sailors directly called them black slaves. Sir, did anyone buy those black slaves? Do they still exist? A chubby man at the bottom asked eagerly with his face twitching. Hey, dude, you are late. This group of people just came out, and they were sold out in less than an hour. I think they are probably already booked. If you want it, there is no chance. The tall and thin man smiled, spread his hands, and said helplessly, oh, those people are so strong, they must be quick to work, and they can save me a lot of money. The fat man muttered, and the disappointment on his face was palpable. He was a flower seller, and he shipped out hundreds of bags of flour every day. There was an urgent shortage of freight workers. Of course, it was definitely not because he paid less money, but because the workers were too greedy. In the past few years, with the unimpeded trade routes between Spain and the Mediterranean, all kinds of goods in England have begun to flow abroad, and this huge demand has made the factories of the whole of England make a lot of money in an instant. At this time, England had a rare labor shortage. Yes, that's right, most of the 3 million people are underage children, and most of the remaining population are bound to the land. The refugees were swept away, and they couldn't force the farmers to leave the land and go into the factories. After all, working in a factory is not as good as farming. After all, farming is not life-threatening. As a result, when the restless businessmen found that they did not have enough workers in their hands, they had to rack their brains with their vigorous desire. First of all, the merchants spent a lot of money to buy the dignitaries in London, advise His Majesty the King, and let go of the decree prohibiting land enclosure, and the aristocrats also pushed the boat smoothly, so they were more than happy to benefit themselves. However, His Majesty the King was steadfast in his determination not to let go of the land enclosure ban. In the face of repeated requests from the dignitaries, His Majesty the King was determined not to waver. Seeing that His Majesty's mind could not be changed, the businessman immediately set his mind abroad. Refugees from Germany and serfs from Eastern Europe came to England wave after wave. At this time, rich black resources were finally discovered. Chapter 327, The Troubadour. For blacks, Edward actually minded a lot, though the Negroes were strong and hard-working. In the case of the whip, we have since experience taught that such a thing in too many numbers must have done great damage to English society. For example, under the rule of the white people, South Africa leapt into the ranks of developed countries and even made a few atomic bombs. If the situation continues, South Africa's future is limitless. However, no matter how well you develop, you are not as good as others. As a result, the blacks who came to work in South Africa relied on their numbers, seized power in an instant, and turned South Africa into a developing country. It is really an eye-opener. In order to maintain the purity of the Anglo-Saxon race and maintain his own rule, the great King Edward VI learned the fine traditions of the Arabs and ordered the House of Lords and the House of Commons to enact laws. Any person or organization that transports such black races into lands ruled by the royal families such as England, Scotland, and Wales must ensure that they must be castrated. Moreover, the owner of the purchase must register with the government and pay the due slave tax. Time, 1553. June 1. Yes, My Majesty the King has not missed a chance of making money by establishing such a tax. Moreover, Edward also stipulated that black females are not allowed to be imported, and offenders will be punished with a ransom that is 100 times their value, and they need to be returned to their original place of ownership. In this way, Edward did not believe that the blacks in England would continue to multiply. However, in this way, due to unqualified castration techniques, many innocent black people died painfully, which led to the appreciation of the price of black slaves. However, the slave attributes and strong physique of black people still make various factory owners and even ranchers flock to them. After all, blacks are still very familiar with the work of shepherding. Cheap and durable black slaves flooded into England like water, filling large and small factories and even pastures in England, and the large-scale plush products flowed to Spain, Portugal, and the Mediterranean coast along with merchant ships. It brought huge wealth to England and a lot of taxes to His Majesty the King. Tariffs, for example, are rising at an annual rate of 10%. Back to the topic. The conversation was lively in the tavern, and people were also discussing it lively, but they couldn't help sighing in their hearts while they were talking. Bristol Port, what a magical place! Although the Southampton port has grown in size due to the prosperity of trade, black slaves are rare. One is that since this year, His Majesty the King has released other ports' right to import black slaves, and Bristol has not been allowed to monopolize it all the time. The second is because of the monopoly position of Bristol Port. Even if other ports are released, businessmen still prefer to take a long way and go to Bristol Port habitually. Thinking of this, everyone's interest in the long-known black slave suddenly decreased a lot. Everyone lives in the port of Southampton, and they are naturally in a bad mood when their port of Southampton is surpassed by the port of Bristol. Port of Bristol, a city in southwestern England, and also a young city, was established in 1542. The entire urban area is run through the city by the Avon River, and the northeast borders on the north, Somerset and South Gloucestershire. Because of its proximity to Ireland, it happened that the Tudor monarchs were keen to develop Ireland, so the city prospered. Of course, the more important reason is that to the left of it is the endless Atlantic Ocean, and it is the best port to go to the Atlantic Ocean during the 15th and 16th centuries. Europe launched a wave of developing the New World of America, and Bristol, facing the Atlantic Ocean, was the center of the slave trade, and a large number of slaves were traded to the Americas according to historical records, from 1700 to 1807. More than 200 slave ships docked in Bristol and sold more than 500,000 black Africans to America as slaves. Excuse me, may I ask, are you discussing the port of Bristol? Just as the voices of everyone's discussion gradually became smaller, a burst of greetings suddenly sounded in everyone's ears. The tall and thin man sitting in the middle spoke with a voice and looked up. There was a young man looking gentle in front of a small fire pond nearby. He had a sorry expression on his face and looked at him sincerely. If you don't know, I thought he was interested in men, sir. I'm really sorry to bother you. I just overheard you talking about the port of Bristol. Excuse me, is the port of Bristol famous? The young man's voice was pleasant, and it sounded more comfortable than a woman's, which made people subconsciously immerse themselves in it. Although his face is heavily weathered, it can still be seen that he is a handsome young man, and even has an extremely handsome appearance, which makes the tall and thin man feel a little dazed. As he said that, the handsome man got up and gradually walked over. Only then did the tall and thin man notice the harp in his hand, and then he suddenly realized that he was a troubadour. It was rare to see a troubadour in England recently, and the tall and thin man also got up and greeted him friendly. How do you do, sir? The port of Bristol is famous indeed, the tall and thin man said in his mouth, but his eyes were full of doubt. So, I just arrived in Southampton a few days ago, from Calais. A troubadour, the troubadour, Besvin, naturally sensed the doubts on the other side, and smiled softly. I see, then, if you don't mind, you can come here and I'll explain it to you. The tall and thin man glanced at the troubadour, thinking that he might be of noble origin and belonged to the troubadour. Among the troubadours, troubadour and trouble are two major factions of troubadours, both of which originate in Italy, while the former are mostly noble knights, with profound culture and solid musical skills. Works such as Charlie the Lionheart are all is their writing. Therefore, when the tall and thin man saw this young poet of the same status, he immediately invited him. Being with these ordinary people, he seemed extraordinarily rustic, and you must know that his family was originally a baron. Although he was masturbated by Henry VIII, the long history and culture are still not comparable to these assholes. The others looked at each other in blank dismay. They didn't understand that Alter Stockton, who had always been arrogant and stubborn and difficult to communicate with, turned into a pleasant face and even received a stranger. Chapter 328. Crying. After an hour of detailed talk, the troubadour from Calais finally understood why the young and prosperous port of Bristol had caused these people to talk about it. Thank you so much, Mr. Mark Antoine. It is my greatest honor to meet you in Southampton. The two discussed for more than an hour, and the relationship between them naturally became close, and of course their names were notified. The handsome poet bowed slightly and thanked my Mr. Poet. It is my luck to know you. The tall and thin Mark Antoine had a smile on his face, and his serious face was like melting ice at this time, giving people a sense of friendship, and the sense of distance disappeared instantly. Please forgive my presumptuous invitation. Mr. Alves Besvin, I don't know if I have the honor. Please come to my house as a guest. After all, in Southampton, it is very rare to know you as a friend. The thin and tall man made an invitation gesture with difficulty, with a rare look of request on his face. The troubadour cast a glance at him, thinking, I'm afraid not, Monsieur Antoine. The troubadour shook his head and politely refused, with an apology in his eyes. I still have some companions waiting for me in the hotel. Please forgive my faux pas. Oh, no, this is my faux pas. It's all my fault for being too excited. I should be asking you to forgive me. Afterwards, the tall and thin man waved his hand, and he also understood how presumptuous it was to invite under the current circumstances. Inviting a person whom he has only known for an hour to be a guest at home. Not only is the guest worried, but he himself feels a little regretful when he thinks about it now. Anglo-Saxon has always been synonymous with rigidity, and necessary and accurate etiquette is a must for people to get along with each other. They are not Scots who drink too much, yell and call friends. Thinking about it, the tall and thin man felt extremely regretful about his actions. He is a man of noble blood, not those short shirts who worry about eating every day. The troubadour was also polite, and after a while of greetings, the two parted ways. The spring night passed very quickly, and it seemed that in the blink of an eye, the whole city was boiling. Merchants from all over the world, ordinary people on the go. In the narrow streets of Southampton Port, there are many people coming and going, full of voices, and a bustling scene. The troubadour, Alves Besvin, and his two servants looked at the bustling Southampton Port with great interest. England is indeed very prosperous, and my hard work is not in vain. Alves walked the streets with an extremely relaxed expression this time. He came to England not just for fun, but for a purpose. The Besvin family is also considered a big family in Calais. Although it is not a noble family, it is also a knight family. It has been passed down from generation to generation and has maintained the rule of Calais for the English royal family for more than 100 years. Calais and Boulogne are isolated in France, basically in an isolated island position, and the French are staring at them, and they are in danger of losing their homes and lives at any time. Therefore, Calais and Boulogne have always needed the support of England, and the connection with the king cannot be interrupted. Therefore, his main purpose of coming this time is to represent his own family and those allied families, to conduct a private investigation in England to find out what the young king who has been on the throne for many years is like. Second, it is also for the family to expand the business, so come for a visit. Since Princess Mary married Prince Philip of Spain, the business between England and Spain has been booming, and with the release and care of the Spanish Navy that dominates half of the Mediterranean Sea from time to time, England's economy is like a soaring dragon, and the prospects are very bright. Although Calais, Boulogne and other places intervened in the trade between England, Germany and France due to geographical factors, the Besvin family was also salivating in the face of the fact ahead. Alves was surprised to see a group of uniformed and knife-carrying teams passing by his side from time to time. Moreover, the clean and tidy appearance on the street also opened his eyes. This is different from the small city of Calais, or from all the cities on the continent of Europe. There is no sewage flowing on the street, and there is no stool that can be stepped on at any time. The flat and wide street is so pleasant and gratifying. Breathing the smell-free air and looking at the endless stream of pedestrians, Alves thought, maybe I should live in the city. But before he felt much time, there was a burst of noise and crying in front of him. Raising his head, Alves walked over with great interest, and the two servants behind him followed closely, walking along with the flow of people. Alves didn't need to look for it specially. In less than 5 minutes, he arrived at a place where the bustle took place. I saw that in front of a mansion, there were hundreds of people watching the fun, densely packed in front, and Alves couldn't see a single trace of the specific situation. He looked around and found that there were many mansions nearby. The roads were flat and spacious, and all kinds of flowers were in full bloom. At first glance, it was a wealthy area with extremely high land prices. However, this place where ordinary people dare not set foot easily is now like a busy street, overcrowded, destroying the quiet environment here. What made him even more strange was that in this noble place, he heard the cries of women and children, and the voices even became louder and louder, which was absolutely unreasonable. Seeing this, with curiosity in his heart, he stepped forward and slowly squeezed to the front under the guard of 2 strong servants. After wiping the sweat from his forehead, Alves looked around. I saw that the spacious door was roughly opened, and the traces of damage on the door panel were extremely obvious beside the gate. 4 of them were dressed in black tights, with gold thread on the cuffs and necklines, red and black cloaks on the back, and sharp and majestic swords on their waists. They looked very imposing, daunting, and the onlookers were very obvious. No matter how crowded the back was, they never dared to come within 10 feet of that group of people. Alves didn't know what these people were doing for a while, but he could guess that they were government officials, and the common people were afraid of them from the bottom of their hearts. He carefully glanced at these people, but turned his gaze to the crying sound inside the gate. I saw, inside the gate, on the grass in the yard, a lady in a long skirt hugged her several children, sobbing softly, and the child in her arms was about 7 or 8 years old. It seemed that it was because of fear. "Let go of your throat and cry," burst a man in his 20s, dressed in Chinese clothes, stood aside with a heavy face, silent. Chapter 329 The Haunting of the Palace Intelligence Office. Facing the crying of his wife and children, he just glanced helplessly, and then looked darkly into the room, where the group of sword-carrying men in black were lavishly flipping through his belongings, showing no mercy at all. Within a short while, a hill was piled up in the courtyard, a hill made of gold coins and silver coins, which made the onlookers open their mouths in surprise and sighed endlessly. Facing such a scene, Alves was also a little dazed. Although my family is also in business, it is the first time that so much money has been accumulated in front of me. It stands to reason that, as the eldest son of the family, countless money passed through his hands. But this was the first time he had a shocking feeling about money. The gold coins are well maintained. Under the sunlight, the golden light is shining and extremely dazzling. Sure enough, gold is the most precious thing in the world. Whoever has it can command everything he wants. With gold, it is also possible to send souls to heaven. Unconsciously, Alves whispered this famous quote from Columbus. Relying on his own qualities, Alves finally moved his eyes away from the gold, and he took a slow breath. But what surprised him was that although the surrounding civilians were stunned and salivating obsessively, they restrained their actions very well and did not dare to take a step. It's not normal. These civilians can't have my level of cultivation then. There must be someone nearby who frightens them. Alves glanced at the surrounding civilians with piercing eyes, and couldn't help guessing in his heart for a moment. His eyes turned to the 4 sword-bearing men in black tights guarding the gate, and his eyes froze for a moment. I'm afraid they are the key factor, Alves murmured softly as if feeling Alves' gaze. The 4 men in black turned their eyes to Alves at this moment, with the cold light in their eyes, which was meaningful. Alves was suddenly startled by this, turned his head and avoided his eyes with smiles on their lips. The 4 men in black stared at him for 3 seconds before returning to their original state. Hey, men, you're not from England. Alves thought about the strange eyes of these 4 people, and suddenly felt a voice coming from his ear. He looked up, and saw a sturdy, wheat-colored man in his 20s leaning over and asking softly with a hint of doubt on his face. No, we belong to the same king. Alves shook his head lightly and explained. However, these words made the man confused. Facing the confusion on the man's face, Alves didn't need to explain. The first no is to deny that he is English, that he belongs to the Duchy of Normandy. We belong to the same king, and declare that he is one with them. Man, I'm afraid you don't know. These people belong to the Star Chamber Court. The man thought that Alves was from Wales, Scotland, or Ireland, but he was not interested in knowing. Facing a rookie like Alves, the man has the desire to be a good teacher. I saw that he was slightly bowed, his face was radiant, and he was extremely airy. Hearing the explanation, Alves couldn't help but take a deep breath. The reputation of the Star Chamber Court, even in Calais, is famous, and his reputation is even wider than that of the King of England, and it belongs to the Star Chamber Court. No wonder these civilians are afraid to go forward. It turns out that these people have such a strong background, but, let me tell you, they actually come from an organization called the Palace Intelligence Service, and the person directly reporting to him is the young His Majesty the King. After squinting at the 4 men in black, the man whispered furtively, for fear that others would overhear. I see. There was a sudden realization on Alves' face, which made the man beside him very satisfied with a secret that seemed to be revealed. And a comfortable smile appeared on his face. Obviously, this kind of thing made him feel very happy. Seeing Alves revealing his movements cooperatively, the man couldn't hold back the excitement in his heart, as if he wanted to pour out all the secrets in his heart. And look at the man standing in the yard. He is the director of the Engineering and Construction Department of Southampton City. He heard that he was reported by someone, and he was targeted by this group of people. As he spoke, the man furtively pointed to the silent man standing in the middle of the courtyard, and whispered, but, I think it's more than that. In the middle of speaking, the man's original babbling suddenly stopped, and he carefully looked around, especially the 4 men in black who looked like stone pillars, who looked extra cautious. He shut his mouth and said nothing, and Alves also resisted the doubts in his heart and did not ask any questions. After a while, the man couldn't hold back any longer. He pulled Alves' arm, pointed to the back, and stepped back. Alves hesitated for a moment, and followed suit. This stopped when the two retreated to the back of the crowd. A man with a big mouth glanced at Alves cunningly, and pouted his mouth lightly, implying something, and Alves understood what he meant in an instant. In order to satisfy his thirst for knowledge, he was willing to spend a little money. He casually took out a silver coin from his pocket and threw it into the hands of the man with a big mouth. The man with a big mouth saw that it was a shilling, and his mouth was so happy that he said hastily, I heard that Your Excellency, the director, actually believes in a false religion in private, and even shields those believers who believe in a false religion. That's why people from the Palace Intelligence Department will appear, otherwise, this small corruption case is not worth their hand. As he said that, the man with a big mouth showed emotion and even snickered. Let me tell you, sir. The man with a big mouth gloated a little. Your Excellency the Minister, and his believers who also believe in false religion, will have all their properties confiscated and fined to go to Ireland to face those false believers every day. I think it must be very pleasant. No matter how ignorant he is, Alves still understands that Ireland has always been very repulsive to English people, even if they are also Catholics in the face of interests. Everything is nothing but belief. This is really a touching thing. Originally, he was going to say something sad, but when he thought that the people around him believed in the Anglican sect, he decided not to court death also. He's going to hide his beliefs, and England is still a bit dangerous for him. Who are you? Only then did Alves realize that a commoner cannot know these things, and this person in front of him is very dangerous. Don't get me wrong, Mr. Besvin, His Majesty the King knew about your arrival, so he specially asked me to invite you over." The man with a big mouth waved his hands at a nervous Alves, with a faint smile on his face, explaining slowly. Chapter 330. 1555. Alves was stunned for a moment, and then took a closer look at him. The man with a bad mouth in front of him immediately showed his greedy and wretched temperament now. In his eyes, a young guard with a straight back, a high-spirited and confident young guard stood upright in front of him. Although his mouth appeared to be wide when he laughed to death, however, the plain clothes still couldn't block the court atmosphere of his king's guard. "Of course, it's my pleasure." Alves didn't hesitate for a long time, and as soon as the young guard with a big mouth finished speaking, he answered with a smile, looking at the polite, gentle young quasi-knight in front of him. The eldest son of a knight is usually called this way. The guard with a big mouth couldn't help but smile. He is quite satisfied with Alves' cooperation, so don't waste him time. He has always been pleasing to the eye after all. It is too troublesome to verify identity or something. Come with me, sir. The carriage is ready for you." As he said that, the big mouth guard made an invitation gesture with his right hand, and the smile on his face was extraordinarily bright. "Master?" Alves was about to leave when the two burly servants behind him no longer remained calm, but looked at him nervously, gently tugged his sleeves, and looked at him. The big mouth guard's eyes were full of suspicion and vigilance. "No problem. Go back and wait for my news." The voice was crisp. Alves glanced at the two servants, and said to them with an unquestionable tone, but the voice was not too low. The big mouth guard heard it clearly. He just smiled slightly when he saw this. Of course he could hear the meaning behind it clearly. It's just human nature. The two loyal guards can also follow. There is no problem. The big mouth guard didn't want to waste any more time, so he said decisively, and then led the way ahead. Alves didn't stay any longer, and followed with two healthy servants, turning left and right. You came to an alley corner, where a low-key and luxurious carriage was parked, and the horse was eating grass under the comfort of the groom. Alves took a careful look, stayed in an inconspicuous part of the carriage, saw the red and white roses, and then got into the carriage neatly. At this time, Our Majesty the King was lying on a chaise longue carefully carved by carpenters himself under his own command, covered with a layer of soft goose-down quilt. And he was lying lazily on it with his eyes closed. People are like a lump of mud. This year is already 1555, and it is also the 8th year he has ruled England, and he is also 19 years old, although he has reached the standard of adulthood both now and in later generations, and has grown a thick black beard on his lips. But as a king, he still looks young naturally. He is not married yet, so his face still looks green. Of course, this is no wonder to him. His fiancée, Her Majesty the Queen of Scots, is only 14 years old now. Although it seemed to people at the time that he had reached the age of marriage, Edward still couldn't bear it. After all, her body cannot bear the risk of childbirth. If it is in later generations, it will start at least 3 years. And the maximum penalty will be death. More importantly, there is no shortage of women around Edward. The two sisters, Juliana and Lucy, and Emma, the secretary of the young girl. Of course, for the sake of his health, the young king had been taking good care of himself until he was 16. Even after he was 16, he didn't call out his little brother very often. Even if his frequency is low, he can't hold it for a long time, and the number added up is quite a lot. Thus, His Majesty the King, who was only 19 years old, already had 2 illegitimate children and 1 illegitimate daughter. Luna gave birth to his eldest daughter, Alice Tudor. Lucy gave birth to his eldest son, and Edward named him Henry Tudor in honor of his father, Henry VIII. If he could inherit the throne in the future, he would be called Henry IX. In order to give birth to the second son, Emma, the secretary, named her Adam Tudor after the ancestor of mankind. Regarding this, Edward felt infinitely happy in his heart, which also directly proved that his body still had normal fertility, and the soul of the time traveler hadn't changed anything. Unfortunately, these 3 sons and daughters were born the day before yesterday, but Our Majesty the King was in Southampton. Therefore, he still chose the name, and was waiting to go back to hold his son and daughter. And at this time, standing behind him was a mature young woman about 25 or 6 years old, with a protruding figure and a curvy back. Her whole body was like a ripe peach, even if Edward didn't see her now, but the alluring picture is still conceivable with his eyes closed. Edward thought about his newborn children. After thinking about it, he turned to the secretary behind him. For this secretary, Edward did not dare to use force directly, and the consequences would be serious. This young woman is named Laura Alexander, a widowed girl with a daughter by her side. She has a stubborn and intelligent personality. Most importantly, her father is Ferris Alexander, the chairman of the Privy Council, who is also Edward's right-hand man. Reform go-getters. Although this lord is sometimes stubborn and offensive, most of the time he still completes the tasks assigned by Edward very well, and cooperates with a group of ministers to manage England in an orderly manner. No, in order to understand the land he rules, His Majesty the King personally chose to inspect it. Your Majesty, according to the investigations of Bloodblade and the Palace Intelligence Office, as well as the information personally presented by the Mayor of Southampton, we can confirm that Southampton's reforms have been basically completed, and all that is needed now is time to kill. In general, Southampton City and Southampton County are not bad at implementing central orders. Local governments at all levels have reformed in place. The Southampton inspection can be said to have ended. Laura sat behind Edward, about a foot away, and if he sniffed carefully, Edward could still smell the scent of a mature woman. Laura used to be the secretary of her father, Ferris Alexander. She handles these things very neatly. Compared to Emma, she is a real assistant. So this time, Edward took her with him when he came out, and he felt that the effect was pretty good. So, what happened to the director? Edward still closed his eyes, and after listening to this, he asked lazily. It is said that it is because they have shielded some Catholics and detained the whistleblowers, Laura said without even thinking about it. Obviously she had already made up her mind how to deal with it. Edward continued to ask as usual. Confiscate all property and exile to Ireland. The 2 chapters updated yesterday were wrongly placed in the 2nd volume. This is my fault, and I should be able to change it back tomorrow. Believe me, everyone, Rancho's integrity is very good. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelists. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 331. Back to London. Laura said calmly, as if it was a trivial matter, not worth mentioning. Edward also looked as expected when he heard such an answer. He had heard too many such trivial things. You said, am I too tolerant? Why are those Catholics so presumptuous? Edward opened his eyes, sat up, turned his head, and looked at the plump young woman behind her. She was looking at the documents on her lap solemnly. Under the long black skirt, wide and tender thighs were looming, and the slender appearance made Edward's heart tremble. Jump, plump and authentic, Edward said with a puzzled expression on his face, but his eyes unconsciously cast on her attractive beautiful legs, which were smooth, fleshy, and very good. Your Majesty, I have no right to speak on this matter. This is not my duty as a secretary. For this matter, Laura directly refused without hesitation. She would not do such an easy offending thing. Although her father is still a popular figure in England, he is not an aristocrat after all, and will retire from England's high society in a few years. It is better not to offend others. It's really ignorant. Edward muttered softly from the corner of his mouth. His eyes gradually climbed to her round and slightly drooping body. Even the loose long skirt still couldn't cover up their bulge. Seeing the increasingly obvious anger in the young woman's eyes, Edward smiled awkwardly as a cover, and then lay back pervert. Laura looked at the king's back, rolled her eyes as a sign of contempt, and muttered softly, lying on his recliner again. Edward breathed a sigh of relief. The timing is still not suitable then. Laura, please remember, if there are still those Romans who sneak in the future, directly order Bloodblade to arrest them. Ask Rome for a ransom. Let them go as easily as before. It is too gentle. Edward couldn't help laughing when he thought of the Pope in Rome who had eaten shit when he saw the documents for paying the ransom. Speaking of the Pope, the current Pope Julius III, when Our Majesty the King decided to restart the religious reform, officially announced his membership, and called on all Catholics to set things right. Edward, who was directly angry, couldn't help himself. By the time Scotland was fully committed to its own rule, which was also the year of his engagement to Mary, in 1553, Edward came again to claim the crown. Moreover, in the afternoon of the same day, he was crowned as the leader of the Church of Scotland, which deeply stimulated the elderly His Majesty the Pope. Edward is still very willing to do things that can disgust the Pope. By the way, who am I going to meet today? Just thinking about disgusting people, Edward finally realized that he seemed to be interviewing someone today. Yes, Your Majesty. Laura replied softly, licking her red lips without blinking her eyelids. A young man who seems to be from Calais, who is prowling about England in the guise of a troubadour, and you ask him to come over. Yes, I forgot for a while. Is he here? Edward patted his head. A young man from Calais, who seems to be from a knight family, really wants to know more about it. It should be here. Laura raised her head and said uncertainly, "Your Majesty, the person you want is here." The young guard lowered his head and walked in steadily, with a clear voice, "Please come in." Edward heard this, sat up quickly, and said solemnly, "Yes, Your Majesty." Accompanied by the voice, the guard stepped back gently, but Laura got up from the seat in a hurry, tidied up her appearance, and immediately showed a serious expression on her pretty face, which had a special taste soon. A young man in his 20s with a height of about 1.7 meters walked in, with a soft face, dark blue eyes, pale golden hair, and a smile on his mouth. From the perspective of Edward's aesthetics, he is also a handsome guy. Alves from Calais is in Besven. "See Your Majesty the King." As soon as Alves entered the door, he saw a young man sitting on a strange chair, wearing a silk-woven dress, with a dignified look on his face. Seeing such a scene, Alves didn't know that this was the person he wanted to meet, and immediately bowed in greeting with a respectful expression on his face. "Alves, are you from the Besven family in Calais?" Edward looked into his eyes seriously, looked at the documents on the side, and asked softly, "Yes, Your Majesty. I am the eldest son of the Besven family. I am here to report to you the specific situation of Calais under the orders of my father." Edward didn't look at him anymore, but looked at the document in his hand, a document about the Besven family. The ancestor of the Besven family, Kevin, was only a businessman during the time of Charles VIII, but he wisely followed Henry VIII and fled to France together after that. When Henry VIII returned to the country, Kevin was made a knight, and he owned 3 villages in the town of Besven in Calais as fiefdoms. However, the Beswen family was born with a business gene. After being sealed in Calais, Kevin Beswen took advantage of Calais' geographical location to intervene in the business of France and England, Germany and England, and the whole family was like a snowball. Rapid development and growth due to the special location of Calais. The royal family uses various families as an extension of controlling Calais, and the Besven family is also one of them, and it is also an important one. "Alves, what's the current situation in Calais?" Edward looked at it for nearly 3 minutes before raising his head and asking. Of course Alves knew what the young king was asking. He straightened his mind and said calmly, "Your Majesty, after Henry II of France acquired the city of Francisco, the situation around Calais became quiet. So far, Calais is still as stable as a mountain." Alves' voice sounded very crisp, mellow and pleasant, coupled with his handsome face. "He must be the darling of the ladies at the banquet. This is the current specific situation in Calais. Please review it." Alves took out a booklet from his arms. Edward's eyes showed a hint of interest, and the maid at the side quickly picked it up and handed it to Edward. Edward took a cursory glance and found that Calais was riding on the tailwind of England's business development, and the economy was developing pretty well. Now it basically pays tens of thousands of pounds in taxes a year in this regard. Edward nodded in satisfaction and said with a smile, "Get ready, Laura, back to London tomorrow, and Mr. Alves, you follow me too." Chapter 332 The Bastard. In 1555, on February 16th, there was continuous light rain in London today as usual, which made this busy city even more busy. However, it is gratifying that the city of London no longer sees that kind of sludge mixture flowing unscrupulously in the streets, nor does it see the black and yellow sewage flooding narrow alleys and making people unable to travel. Of course, what makes His Majesty the King most proud is that even though it was raining in the sky, the merchants still walked in an orderly manner, urging horses, pulling carts, and carrying burdens. Faced with such a light rain, the traders who cared about their interests only regarded the light rain as a sunny day, tall and wide hats, and small black umbrellas to keep the cold drizzle away. At this moment, our king naturally did not rest, but sat in the carriage, urging the groom to speed up. Laura sat securely in the corner of the carriage, looking at a book in her hand. The pages were already full of wrinkles. Obviously, this young woman was serious about reading. Edward glanced at her helplessly. From this point of view, she seemed to be unrestrained and relaxed, but he was anxious and irritable, losing his former indifference. However, when he thought of the 3 children he was about to meet, Edward immediately became nervous and excited again. This is the first time in his 2 lives that he has given birth to a child, and the feeling of continuing the offspring is really great. More importantly, this broke history. If he had fertility, the possibility of the entire Tudor dynasty becoming extinct would be infinitely reduced. This is something to be happy about. As for the future of the illegitimate child, Edward had a rough plan in mind, and in the end, a nobleman was inevitable. And if there is no official heir in the future, Edward doesn't mind breaking the European inheritance rules, even if it offends the entire European royal family. Thinking of this, Edward's face couldn't help but become serious. "Your Majesty?" Laura on the side noticed that the king's face was a little abnormal, and she quickly tilted her neck and asked tentatively nothing. Edward shook his head and said softly after being interrupted by Laura. Edward smiled to himself. What was he thinking? This matter has not been effected yet? Don't worry about it. And seeing the young king's complexion constantly changing, he couldn't help but feel curious what a strange guy the young woman thought silently in her heart, and then threw herself into the book in her hand on the muddy road. Several carriages were galloping faster than usual. The poor guards, braving the drizzle and wearing a layer of cowhide raincoat, rode horses to guard beside the carriages, and even controlled their mounts. It can be said that it is extremely hard work to keep the speed parallel to the carriage. Soon, the convoy saw the broad Thames River, and up the Thames River was Hampton Palace, and sister Luna, Lucy, and Emma are staying here. Compared with London, Hampton Court Palace has a beautiful environment, quiet and peaceful, which is very suitable for the cultivation of pregnant women. Soon, the horse stepped on the wet grass and quickly came to Hampton Court Palace. Edward got off the car impatiently and walked to the palace of the three women. It stands to reason that in Western traditions, there is no custom of confinement. However, England at this time was very different from the England of later generations. The body's resistance was extremely low. Even if they passed the hurdle of childbirth, there were not a few people who died after childbirth. For example, Edward's mother in this life, Jane Seymour, died of puerperal fever. Therefore, under the letter of Edward Flying Pigeon, the three pregnant women directly lived in a specially remodeled house. It is not as tall and gorgeous as a palace, but looks very simple. The biggest feature is that it is well ventilated, the air circulates smoothly, and the indoor temperature is just right. Therefore, when Edward came back, he did not go to the gorgeous and luxurious palace, but to the spacious maternity room. Edward took a hot bath first to wash off the bacteria and dust on his body, then changed into a comfortable piece of normal clothes, and hurried away. 3 rooms didn't make Edward find the nearest one because of something, and walked in ignoring the serving maid. Edward walked directly into the room looking at it. Lucy is lying on the white velvet bed. Her eyes are fixed on the small crib next to the bed. The corners of her mouth are raised. Her delicate legs are huddled in the quilt. Her body is leaning. Motherly, the radiance filled the entire room. Lucy, my little maid, how is your health? Edward came to the bed in 3 steps, put his hands gently on her shoulders, and greeted her softly. Your Majesty. Lucy's eyes suddenly showed surprise, and the gentle feminine radiance disappeared in an instant, and she returned to the naughty maid familiar to Edward. Why did you come back? I've been waiting for a long time. Lucy misses you so much. I'm afraid I'll never see you again. Lucy embraced Edward's neck in surprise, buried her head in Edward's arms, and said, the original joy turned into crying, and she even sobbed softly, shaking her body. Seeing this, Edward just patted Lucy's smooth and tender back with his right hand, and comforted her softly with his mouth in her ear. This was also his mistake. He misestimated the time and thus failed to be by their side. You must know that at this time, whether it is the East or the West, having a child is no less than passing the test of life and death. Even if he had already arranged for disinfection, hot water, and an experienced midwife, the danger was still huge. Therefore, this fear of life and death is not only unique to Lucy, but also to Luna and Emma. It is possible that they will never see him again. I don't know whether his defensive measures are effective or God blesses. All 3 of them gave birth smoothly, which can be described as happy. Edward comforted Lucy for a while, then looked at the little people aside. The villain was tightly wrapped in silk, his eyes were closed, his mouth twitched from time to time, his skin was smooth and pink, and he looked very cute. Lucy, his name is Henry Tudor. The more Edward watched, the happier he became, and the joy on the corners of his brows couldn't be stopped, and Lucy also nestled in his arms obediently, watching her son quietly. Tudor? Lucy said with some doubts. That's right, it's Henry Tudor. This is the surname he should have, Edward said categorically, without any hesitation. It's no wonder that Lucy was puzzled. In this era, although it is well known that nobles keep mistresses, in order to maintain the face of the so-called nobles, illegitimate children generally do not have the same surname as their biological father. In order to maintain the honor of the family, the nobles would even give away their illegitimate children to sever ties. Chapter 333 Confusion in Ireland. While our king enjoys family reunions, others head down the road of pain and regret. In the busy port of Bristol, merchant ships full of goods are moored, and dock workers are sweating and panting to carry the goods. The weather in early spring was still a bit cold, but the sea breeze was soft and tinged with warmth, so most of the workers took off their shirts and started working naked. Of course, part of the reason is that there is salt in the sea breeze, and it will be very uncomfortable to wear for a day. The overseer at the side watched with a full face, holding a long whip in his hand, and staring at it with wide eyes. After looking at the unloading merchant ships and berths, he arrived at other merchant ships one after another. Especially a merchant ship with which he had a good relationship. He became anxious, and then touched it with his hand. With a shilling in his pocket, after feeling the charm of money, he felt a little out of breath and began to rush. Hurry up, you naked ghosts, time is running out. The supervisor looked at the hard workers passing by one by one. Although they were fast, they still couldn't satisfy him. The whip in his hand came into contact with the ground fiercely, making a frightening sound. Papa, papa, work more quickly, poor ghosts, don't let me see someone being lazy, or you will look better than me. His scolding, coupled with the threat of the whip, made these frail workers dare not speak out, and could only speed up their pace silently to carry the goods. Seeing that the pace of the workers had obviously accelerated, the overseer with a swollen face nodded in satisfaction. Soon, a merchant ship finished unloading, and just when the supervisor thought he could make room for the merchant ship behind, a large cargo ship suddenly jumped in and took the place of the merchant ship behind. Seeing this, the overseer's face changed. This is a merchant ship belonging to the baron's family. Someone dares to grab the position. Isn't this courting death? Just as he was muttering in his heart, and was about to slow down his men's movements and give it a look, he suddenly saw the flag flying on the ship, a beautiful flower. If there is anything peculiar about it, then it has two colors of red and white, and the white is on top of the red, which looks extraordinarily beautiful. Such an appearance made the overseer's heart tremble a little, and his legs trembled. After staying in the port of Bristol for so many years, he didn't know that this was the merchant ship of the royal family, the largest nobleman in England. Killing myself is as simple as killing an ant, but I am really tired of trying to trouble them. The supervisor patted his forehead, his face turned pale, and thin cold sweat broke out on his forehead. I suddenly rejoiced in my heart, but luckily I didn't take any action. After the cargo ship slowly moored, the supervisor immediately followed a tax officer at the pier and boarded the cargo ship. Although it is a ship belonging to the royal family, it still needs to pay taxes, which was ordered by His Majesty the King himself. Soon, a middle-aged man with a beard and wearing captain's clothes came over and had a cordial conversation with the tax official. At this time, several assistants behind the tax official walked into the cabin and started the inspection. The supervisor stood aside, not interested in these pleasantries, and silently thinking about his own thoughts. After the assistant walked out of the cabin, the supervisor cheered up, and his own was about to play. Your Excellency, you have 100 barrels of Irish whiskey and about 5,000 bushels, about 181 tons, of wheat. You need to pay £100, 13 shillings and 6 pence. With a big belly and a pen in his hand, the tax officer calculated with his assistants for a while, and then he said to the long-awaited captain. The captain didn't take it seriously and waved his hand. The sailor beside him immediately brought a small box. When he opened it, he saw that gold and silver coins were piled up shiningly, full of temptation. This is my tax, please click. The captain personally took out 100 gold coins, 13 large silver coins, and 6 small silver coins from the small box, put them in a sack, and sent them to the tax official. The tax officer had a happy smile on his face, and said a few words with the captain with a smile, then pointed to the overseer with a swollen face and said, "This is the overseer of this dock, you can find him." Seeing the tax officer introduce himself, the supervisor immediately bent over, with a very friendly tone, "Your Excellency, Captain, if you are moving the cargo, I will help you to supervise it carefully. I am sure no one is lazy." "Very well, Mr. Overseer, this is your reward." As he spoke, the captain took out a money bag and handed it to him, with a satisfied smile on the supervisor's face. An hour later, with the help of 100 people, 100 barrels of whiskey and 5,000 bushels of wheat were brought down. Then, the overseer with a swollen face waited for a long time, but he didn't get the notification of the delivery, which made him feel very strange. The merchant ship has been moored for several days, but the cargo has not been moved yet, so the supervisor is very curious. On February 19th, about 200 people with their families came to the pier and boarded the long-awaited cargo ship. As the former director of the Southampton City Engineering and Construction Department, Leonard Colin can be considered to have a good life, with sons and daughters, so compared to ordinary English people, he is also considered fat. But just a while ago, he has nothing because he sheltered several missionary priests from Rome. His home was ransacked. By the way, bring your family and start farming in Ireland. To talk about his current mood, he only has one regret to describe, and he shouldn't hurt his family. Holding a 6-year-old son in his left hand and saluting in his right hand, Leonard endured physical fatigue and boarded the large cargo ship in front of him step by step. "I'm sorry for all this." Looking back at the pier, Men with their families walked behind him, with tired and bitter eyes, boarding the cargo ship step by step. He is also reluctant to give up his hometown, leaving England and heading to a strange place, Ireland. Leonard was full of worries about the future of his family, and he said guiltily to his wife, who was holding his little daughter, "Don't tell me this, Leonard. You are my husband, and I support your choice." As he spoke, his wife shook her head with a pious look on her face. "Besides, this is also for the glory of our Lord, and this is also our duty. Two people can become husband and wife, and their beliefs are naturally the same. Let's go, Anna, let's face the future." Looking at the blue ocean in the distance and the seagulls flying, he said firmly to his wife. Chapter 334. Colonial Ireland. Technically, Ireland was a colony of England as early as 1155. The only English pope in history, Hadrian IV, issued an order to grant the rule of Ireland to the King of England. It was not until 1169 that England began to invade and occupy Dublin Castle for the first time. In 1171, King Henry II of England gained suzerainty over Ireland. However, the areas that England can directly control are limited to Dublin and Taboo, and even with this separation, people only speak Gaelic, not English. The British rulers believed that Ireland's instability and long-running reaction campaigns could easily make it an important base from which domestic and foreign response cases could be exploited, seriously jeopardizing the security of the United Kingdom. In particular, Ireland's close relationship with Spain made Britain more vulnerable. People feel uneasy. This is like the relationship between North Korea and China. Spain, which owns Ireland, has a springboard and may directly land in England at any time. Faced with such a situation, the Tudor monarchs never gave up their colonial rule on Ireland. The biggest problem with ruling Ireland is religion. As early as the 5th century AD, the Irish accepted Catholicism due to the repeated invasions of Ireland. There were constant scuffles among the various tribes on the island. The English ridiculed the Irish as mere Irish, which means dirty, rough, barbaric. For the general Irish people, religion is undoubtedly a good medicine to heal the soul. People long to be saved by God after death and get rid of the pain in this world. Catholicism plays an irreplaceable spiritual role in the daily life of the Irish, so they humbly listen to the teachings of the Pope of Rome, and devoutly follow the teachings and etiquette of Catholicism. In the eyes of the Irish, Britain is only a lord appointed by the Pope, and the Pope is the real supreme leader of Ireland. After England launched the Reformation and broke the cooperative relationship with the Pope, the Irish regarded resistance to England as a religious cause. As the Irish rebels declared, the uprising is holy, legitimate, a holy war in defense of Catholicism. A struggle against a tyrant who refuses to listen to the Pope who speaks for Jesus. However, the real progress of England to Ireland will not be until the time of Henry VIII as king. Henry VIII was wise on the basis of inheriting Henry VIII. In 1534, he adopted the policy of paying first and giving later in Ireland. First, the land was owned by the British king, and then the land was re-granted to those Irish nobles and tribal leaders, which directly weakened Ireland. The prestige of the nobility and the basis of resistance. In this way, all the land in Ireland, like England, originally belonged to the Tudor royal family, and the nobles and all landowners on it had their first allegiance to the royal family. In 1541, under the control of Henry VIII, the Irish Parliament announced that Henry VIII would also serve as the King of Ireland, and stipulated that Ireland and England would be permanently merged and united after Edward succeeded to the throne. Henry VIII's rule over Ireland has been maintained without much change. Dublin, the port city, is the largest port in Ireland and the centre of England's rule in Ireland. The Governor of Ireland is also here. The Governor of Ireland was set in 1171. It can be said that he is the supreme ruler and holds the greatest power in the ruled area of England. Therefore, the Governor of Ireland is given the nickname of Deputy King. But today, Our Excellency the Governor, a middle-aged man in his 30s, with two striking brows on his face, stood on the pier with a straight face, followed by some Dublin officials and nobles. The people around the pier were not surprised, and even watched and discussed with relish, looking like a melon-eating crowd. "Hey, tell me, how many people can come this time?" a strong man in a single shirt asked his companions, his face full of curiosity. "I feel that there are not many people this time. Last month, more than 1,000 people and 5 ships came. There should not be many this time." The companion on the side analyzed it, and then sighed while looking at the rolling sea in the distance. Ireland has always been a poor and remote place, just like the exile of 3,000 miles in ancient China. It is a place that nobles and ministers can't avoid. Therefore, whenever there are immigrants from England, most of the time, His Excellency the Governor will come to greet them in person and arrange the specific arrangements for these immigrants one by one. For Dublin, Every English immigrant came. The strength of the governor's house became stronger as the governor of Ireland. Thomas Maine is certainly no exception, especially since he was appointed governor of Ireland by His Majesty the King. He has never missed a single arrival of immigrants with a salty sea breeze blowing on his face. Thomas Martin stood motionless, looking at the undulating sea in the distance at this moment. The scene from 2 years ago appeared in his mind at that time. After being appointed as the Sheriff of Oxfordshire by His Majesty the King, he vigorously promoted the new farming law, and also helped Oxfordshire establish local governments, so that Oxfordshire completed the command of London and became famous in England when he rushed to London with excitement. The moment he saw His Majesty the King, besides some words of praise, he also got a new appointment. Thomas Maine, I am satisfied with your performance. The young king nodded to him with a look of appreciation in his eyes. Thomas is in a very good mood at the moment, and his performance over the past few years has been recognized. This sense of accomplishment is indescribable. In view of your excellent performance, I will grant you a greater responsibility. I hope you can continue to work hard, of course. Your Majesty, it is my honor to serve you. Thomas shivered, and the excited words blurted out as a result. He came to Ireland and became the Governor-General of Ireland. Your Excellency, why don't you go back and rest for a while? The sea breeze is very strong now. Pay attention to your body. Just when he lost his mind, a young and handsome young man beside him asked softly, with a very concerned tone, No, Sir Perrott, I'm fine. Thomas Mann shook his head lightly, declined his proposal, then straightened his back and stared at the sea in front of him. John Perrott, who was on the side, saw that His Excellency the Governor was so stubborn, he could only shake his head helplessly, and continued to observe with him as the person in charge of the colonial area ahead. He came here to pick up such immigrants. After all, there are only so many immigrants. If you eat more, others will eat less. You can't do it if you don't hurry up. Chapter 335 Irish Colonial Strategy. Since England has undergone a series of reforms, especially the most important local reform, that is, centralization, Edward will send the Minister of the Privy Council to personally check and supervise the 8 regions, and strive to complete such reforms smoothly. Although the process is always accompanied by riots and obstructions, after 3 years of development, it has finally stabilized, and the rest is just a matter of running in. At this time, Ireland, England's first colony, came into Edward's eyes, and it was his own experimental site. If it is said that Henry VIII was calm and only took advantage of the name, then by this time, Edward had undergone great changes. The gradual stabilization of internal affairs made Her Majesty the King finally set his sights on Ireland. This policy is called double-pronged approach. First of all, Edward continued to implement Henry VIII's policy of paying first and giving later, and gradually expanded to the entire island of Ireland. Of course, this pace is slow, and the effect is not very obvious, but it is the most important thing. The name cannot be stopped. On the other hand, in addition to implementing this policy, Edward also implemented colonial expansion. First confiscate the land of the Irish and give it to the obedient Irish, and then pull the obedient to occupy the disobedient land together. And Edward's double control is different from the double control in history. In the 16th century in history, the colonization of England was the real colonization. Colonization means to reproduce and breed. Colonization means that a strong country immigrates to the area it conquered, and plunders the interests of the original local people, plunders and enslaves the local people, and immigrates to the area it conquered. To put it bluntly, the original English looked down on the Irish very much, and even didn't regard them as human beings. Of course, this is the same as they look down on the Chinese and Africans. Later on, the English, who consider themselves an advanced civilization, look down on those Irish who still have slavery and are still dominated by tribes. It is to directly confiscate the land of the Aborigines in Ireland, drive them away, occupy and enslave the Irish. You may not believe it, but the triangular trade, that is, the slave trade, actually originally targeted the Irish. Africa was full of tribes at that time, and there were also some big countries with strong military forces. In the current period, when firearms have not yet flourished, a large number of troops is the greatest danger. Therefore, the Irish became the target of the English and were trafficked to South America, where they were slaved to the Spaniards and Portuguese. In mind, when it came time to colonize North America, the Irish still accounted for a certain proportion of the slave trade. It can be said that the largest builders of the United States in the early days were these Irish slaves. Later, the Irish were the largest ethnic group in the United States. Like blacks, they came to the United States as slaves. Therefore, Irish people have always been dubbed with terms such as wine, barbarism, and violence. But the new colonization advocated by Edward is not like this. After this kind of immigration, using less to strike more, although the benefits are great, It is very difficult, and it even forces the originally divided Irish to unite and create even greater difficulties. Her Majesty the King implements another strategy, wooing a group and suppressing a group. Jointly choose the tribes close to England, and cooperate with them to attack those hostile tribes, so as to gradually expand the British occupation area and gain more and more followers in the later stage. This is like a snowball, getting bigger and bigger, and finally Ireland will join England naturally as the colonial New Deal. The Ulster region of Ireland became the main target of England. According to the oldest division of Ireland, the whole of England is divided into the provinces of Ulster, Connaught, Munster and Leinster. These four provinces still have provincial flags. The province of Ulster is close to England and is the northernmost part of the island of Ireland. It is the main area of England's colonization. The Dublin area is here, and it also includes the later Northern Ireland. The westernmost is Connaught, the easternmost is Leinster, and the southernmost is Munster. To nibble step by step and fight steadily are the principles and policies instructed by Edward himself. Thomas Maine, who came to Ireland, chose the nailing policy based on His Majesty's strategy and the situation in Ireland. The so-called pinning is to divide the Ulster area into a dozen small points, which will be used as strongholds, and then expand the area with points, striving to digest Ulster province in one fell swoop within 5 years as the chief of one of the strongholds. John Barrett is of course obliged to win more immigrants for his stronghold. The moment he saw the king again, he knew that his fate would be different. At a very young age, his mother told him that his father was Henry VIII, King of England. Once, he was distressed as the king's son. He doesn't have any inheritance rights, at most he owns a large manor. And he doesn't even have a title of knight. But the reality forced him to succumb, and gradually began to agree with this concept again, and he gave up. But after the death of Henry VIII, he suddenly got a knight title and became a high-ranking figure in the county. Only when he felt what a real nobleman is, he realized how small and short-sighted he was. Until he met the young king, he knew that his chance to become a real nobleman had come as an illegitimate child. His chances of becoming a nobleman are hundreds of times higher than that of ordinary people. Therefore, even when he came to Ireland, he still worked tirelessly and worked diligently. This is definitely not to become the so-called court noble, but to become a powerful noble with a fief only with definite credit. Can he get what he wants? Layers of memories flooded my mind, and bursts of cheers came from my ears. John looked up and saw that 2 dark cargo ships were gradually approaching the port under the escort of 5 or 6 merchant ships. Ordinary people are certainly excited every time an immigrant comes. There must be armed merchant ships escorting them, and the merchant ships also bring the commodities needed by the colony, and purchase the specialties here, and bring them back to England. And in front of him, His Excellency the Governor of Ireland also showed a faint smile on his staid face. At the moment, right behind him, more than a dozen people in charge of other strongholds also looked at the cargo ship coming from afar with joy on their faces, and became wary of each other. Of course, the same is true for Sir John, and population is the booster of his achievements every month. It's the usual drama in Dublin. Chapter 336. To be precise, Ulster Province has a total of 18 strongholds according to the 9 counties in Ulster Province. Each county has 2 strongholds. On average, each stronghold has a population of thousands of people and more than 200 soldiers fighting. The current population of Ireland is roughly calculated at the beginning of the 17th century, with a population of less than 500,000, and now including some small savage tribes in remote areas, it is 500,000. 500,000, divided into large and small tribes. It can be said that these strongholds are comparable to those of medium-sized tribes, and it is still possible to maintain the situation according to Edward's setting. Each stronghold builds a large fortress as the central point, and then surrounds it with tribes close to England, and finally spreads slowly, completely digesting the entire Ulster Province. If this model works, within 10 years, the entire island of Ireland will become England's backyard. Therefore, Edward also carefully selected the remaining officers of these 18 strongholds. Except for John Barrow, the rest of the stay-at-home officers are basically from the first batch and the second batch of public selection examinations, and they are relatively capable, open-minded officials, and His Majesty the King is more optimistic about the future. Of course, including Lemire, who hasn't shown up for a long time, and Sue Wire from Norwich. Lemire's face was full of vicissitudes and maturity at this time as a commoner. He started with the help of the head of the 100 household district, and worked as the head of the 100 household district in Cambridgeshire. After 3 years of hard work, he finally climbed to the position of the head of the 1000 household district in South Cambridge. It can be said that he has climbed to the upper class society, although at the bottom, is an important step. This is, As the head of the district, Lemire can finally have a surname. Like ordinary people, he takes the name of his father Watson as his surname, and his full name is Lemire Watson. Coming to Ireland this time, like Sir John Perrot, is also a good opportunity for him, a good opportunity to step out of the common people. Thinking of his lovely son, Lemire's heart became more and more heated. It is his biggest dream to leave a title for future generations. Thinking, he glanced at the young man next to him again, who was 3 or 4 years younger than him. With light blonde hair there is a hint of bookishness, with 2 black beards on the corners of his mouth. His eyes are wandering around, and the bookish atmosphere is mixed with a trace of sleekness. 2 different temperaments appeared on the same person, which seemed extremely contradictory. Seeing this person, Lemire felt a sense of friendship in his heart. He knew that in England's current officialdom, although there were still many people who came from the position of assistant secretary, the mainstream trend was the group of young people who were born after the entrance examination. They are currently the fastest promoted in the officialdom, and they are also the people with the broadest future. There was a brew in his mouth, and just when his lips were about to start, cheers came from his ears. Looking up, 2 immigrant ships were escorted by a group of armed merchant ships and came to the pier. Ignoring the conversation anymore, Lemire hurriedly started his steps and rushed to the vicinity of the besieged governor. The next step is about the future. Thomas looked indifferently at the slowly docking cargo ship, then walked over as the central point. When His Excellency the Governor moved, all the people around him surged, and the crowd slowly moved to the trestle bridge, and the cargo ship had already put down the ladder, and a fat man with a big belly came down with a serious face, making it look like everyone owed him money. But when he saw His Excellency the Governor, his face suddenly melted. The flesh on his face was squeezed into a ball, his eyes were narrowed, and he looked a little cute instead. Your Excellency, according to the decree of the Privy Council, this is the immigrant population in March, a total of 668 people, 321 adult males, 252 females, and 95 children. Immigrants are mainly men, but most of the time they migrate in families, so there are also many women and children. Thank you, Mr. Wiggs. His Excellency the Governor squeezed a smile on his face and comforted him softly. This is my mission, Your Excellency the Governor. Fatty's expression eased a lot, and he continued, for His Majesty the King, for His Majesty the King. His Excellency the Governor was not slow to react, and he also said softly. The 2 stared at each other for a while, and suddenly laughed. The scene looked very friendly. For His Majesty's sake, this is just a joke, which is extremely popular in English official circles, more precisely, among the group of officials who were admitted because of the examination. After some teasing, let's talk about what happened in England. Half an hour passed like this, and all the immigrants on the boat got off. The 2 greeted each other again, and after saying goodbye, His Excellency the Governor brought the immigrants to the temporary camp, which was the place where previous immigrants stayed after they came to Ireland. The rest was naturally arranged by someone, and His Excellency the Governor returned to his mansion. Walking into the hall, 18 pairs of lantern-like eyes stared straight at him, looking like they were about to devour everything, but they didn't frighten him. This is the rhythm of coming every month, and his strong heart has adapted. Your Excellency the Governor, with a burst of greetings. Thomas sat down peacefully. There are relatively few immigrants this month, so don't fight for the top 10 strongholds that have been allocated last time. Seeing the eagerness of the crowd, Thomas said something quietly. Alice, immediately, exclamations were heard in the hall. Lemire, John Perrot and the other 8 were overjoyed. Your Excellency, our place is the farthest from Dublin, and we face the most pressure from the Irish. This time we need 200 people. John Perrot stood directly in front of Thomas, without even thinking about it, and spit out a large number. Seeing this, the faces of the other 7 people were on fire, and they were out of breath. Your Excellency, we also need 200 people in our stronghold. Recently, a large tribe moved here. Your Excellency, we need 150 people. Your Excellency the Governor, Your Excellency the Governor. John's appetite to swallow 1/3 of the immigrants at once angered the others, and various numbers popped up like money. If they were added together, there would be more than 1,500 people. As a result, the Sir, who knew that he had committed the wrath of the public, shook his head with a wry smile on his face, and His Excellency the Governor, who was sitting on the main seat, was also hurt by this kind of discussion, especially the sound of His Excellency the Governor, which was simply a reminder. Rubbing his eyes, His Excellency the Governor glared at Mr. Jazz, who started the war, and could only get a wry smile. Chapter 337. My town. Your Excellency the Governor reconciled a bit, and the leaders of many strongholds were also polite, and they were courteous, and then the whole meeting was much more peaceful than before. Sir John, who proposed at the beginning, was targeted by everyone in the end, and received the least share, 75 people. However, His Excellency the Governor, who knew his identity, took good care of him. Most of them were adults. Although there were also a lot of women, women could still be used as soldiers in emergencies. With a smile on his face, Sir John nodded and said goodbye to many strongholds before the spoils conference ended. At this time, Lemire came over. He glanced at Sir John, who was a little unhappy, and said in a friendly tone, "Mr. Jazz, I really can't help you today. Everyone is a little impulsive." Looking at this middle-aged man with obvious kindness, Sir John restrained his smirk, shook his head sincerely, and said, "It's because I'm too impulsive. I still have to suffer. It's good to have a good memory." As he said that, he looked at the middle-aged man who took the initiative to show his favor. He knew that this was another stronghold left by Lemire Watson. Although he didn't know what his purpose was, it belonged to the left behind. "Damn place, friendship is still necessary, Mr. Watson. Are you free now?" Hearing this sentence, Lemire couldn't help but feel happy, but he replied calmly, "Certainly, my sir. What can you do?" Lemire continued the conversation logically, casting questioning eyes as he spoke nothing. "It's just that I have some questions that haven't been resolved. You are in a different environment, so I'm afraid you can give me different suggestions." Sir John smiled and pretended to ask for advice. "Okay, it just so happens that I can also learn from you, and I have some doubts." Lemire also looked in agreement, and responded modestly under the surprised eyes of others. The two walked together and went to a pub in Dublin for a drink. Time always flies by. The next day, Sir John stroked his drowsy head and shook it unconsciously. "Oh, I drank too much yesterday, and my head hurts. However, it has gained a lot. At least it is also an ally." Although his head hurt, Sir John still showed a satisfied smile. He was satisfied with yesterday's harvest. "It has been nearly a year since I came here. The original stronghold, which was only the size of a village, has become larger and larger. At present, it has become a small town. The number of immigrants in the small town is less than 1,000, and the surrounding tribes are surrounded in circles. The closer to the small town, the closer the relationship, and the deeper the Anglicization." When he came out this time, he had to go back sooner. After all, he brought out nearly 1/3 of the people, feeling the fog on his face and the somewhat blurred road. While riding his horse, Sir John looked back at the convoy pulling a large amount of goods, feeling a little anxious in his heart. Although there are not many 75 people, most of them are with their families. Especially in recent months, immigrants basically come from one household, so there are a lot of messy things, and dozens of flatbed trucks have to be built, pulling the elderly and children, and saluting. Of course, there are the most important supplies. Ireland is short of everything: iron, weapons, salt, cloth, and some shortage of wheat, which are all needed in his stronghold. These materials are not only for the stronghold's own use, but also for exchanging materials with the tribes that have made friends with them. 30 miles away from Dublin, 200 militiamen rode vigilantly on their horses. Their bows and arrows must not and could not be released from their hands. England's rule in Dublin, Ireland, can only be maintained within a radius of 30 miles. If it goes out of the range, everything is in danger from time to time. A poison arrow from the forest, or a small-scale raid by the hateful wildlings, is hard to guard against. Of course, this is much better than before. In the past year, various strongholds have fully blossomed, attracting the attention of most tribes, and the environment in Dublin has improved a lot. Sir John's face was also a little tense. He was wearing a silk underwear with a layer of leather armor on the outside thanks to the lack of horses in Ireland. Even though Sir John felt that the speed was very slow, the whole procession was still traveling at a speed of 20 miles an hour, starting from 6 o'clock in the morning to around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The sky was already dark, and a group of people arrived at this stronghold and walked more than 200 miles. "It's here, it's finally here," the militiamen shouted excitedly, rejoicing that the journey was safe. What was presented in front of everyone was a small town surrounded by a thick fence, with a small river flowing through it. From a distance, through the gaps in the fence, there were vague figures, and it seemed that there were a lot of people. The entire town is in the shape of a ladder, with only one exit, and it is much larger than the rural landowner's manor on the outskirts of the town. Young crops sprouted from the plowed fields everywhere, showing vitality, and near the gate of the fence, a team of militiamen guarded it, and no one was allowed to come or go unless there were special orders. Seeing his own territory, Sir John finally showed a smile on his face. He steered the horse to turn around, and said to the new immigrants on the horse and in the car, "This is my town, Wenger. And it is also where you will live in the future." The immigrants looked at the simple cottage in front of them, and at the family members around them, they had no choice but to accept it. Living in a safe place is not bad. In their minds, they thought they were living in the wilderness. There's still a lot of open space here. I will divide the land for you to build houses, and divide the land for farming. Leading the immigrants into the town, Sir John pointed to the empty flat ground and said to the immigrants, however, the land is not free. You need to spend money to buy it. If you don't have money, you need to deduct it from your future salary. By the way, from now on, if you work here, whether it's plowing the land, shepherding sheep, or doing other things, half of all your income will be handed over to me. Everything here belongs to His Majesty the King. This is His Majesty's land. This is something you must understand. Sir John glared fiercely at the new immigrant, and spoke domineeringly, completely ignoring the immigrant's feelings at this time. The immigrants took a closer look. Although the entire town is very large, the buildings only accounted for nearly 1/3 of the scale, and the rest was empty as for their arrival. The other immigrants seemed to be familiar with it. After taking a look at it, they went about their own business very indifferently. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelists. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 338. Although the immigrants came from England one by one, the clothes on their bodies were neat and tightly wrapped, and they seemed to be ready for a long time. As a member of the immigrants, Leonard is no different from ordinary immigrants. He can't tell that he was born as a minister. At most he is a small country gentleman. He and his wife and children were dressed in ordinary linen, and they didn't wear any jewelry on their hands and necks. They looked very ordinary. Not only them, but the rest of the immigrants also looked very ordinary. If there was any difference, most of them had rosy faces, and they seemed to be pampered. There is a reason for this. Although they are confused about the future, everyone still knows that the greed of human nature is uncontrollable, and only by restraining themselves can they keep themselves and their families safe. As the minister, his resignation not only involved himself, but also involved some petty officials and squires, who were dissatisfied with Protestantism. Most of the people were separated from him, and only 2 or 3 families were with him. Seeing the figures of these 3 families, Leonard breathed a sigh of relief. With people who can gather together, then in this small town, a small town surrounded by savages will be much safer. Holding his young son with his left hand and his wife with his right hand, even though Leonard entered this small town that was supposed to be safe, he was still not at ease. Lowering his head, he softly comforted his restless son, then turned around to comfort his worried wife. Although he was a little busy, Leonard's ears were still listening carefully. After all, this was related to their future vitality. Hearing such harsh conditions, Leonard's face did not change. Before coming, he had already thought of it. I'll give you a day off today. Starting tomorrow, no matter men, women, old or young, all have to get up and do things. Don't be lazy. Sir John's hands were folded behind him, and in his hands was a black and hideous riding whip. If he was whipped, it would definitely hurt. I am a majestic knight. How can I do those despicable things like those peasants? This is a man in common clothes with a big belly standing out with a displeased expression. His expression is a little angry, and he even feels a little humiliated. Sir, let me tell you, from today onwards, I am the biggest here. Even if you were baron sirs in the past, now you are just a humble and pitiful immigrant without the slightest freedom. When the word humble was said, the contempt in Sir John's eyes was clearly visible, and the pot-bellied sir couldn't help trembling with anger. You. He stared, staring at Sir John with his chin raised in disbelief, stuttering for a moment. Sir John waved his right hand, and the whip in his hand was like a silver snake, heading straight for that knight. Before he could react, a bloodstain appeared on his face, a long bloodstain, even. It seemed that the whip was a bit heavy, and the wound was still bleeding, and this paunchy jazz was thrown to the ground all at once, touching the wound on his face with both hands, gasping and howling unceasingly because of the shortness of breath. The round and round belly went up and down suddenly, which made people want to sit up. Remember, here in the future, I will be what I say. Don't question, don't doubt my rights. With the cold light in his eyes, Sir John put away his horsewhip that was still stained with blood, approached the talking baxter, turned around again, and said sharply to the group of new immigrants, remember, although His Majesty the King has sent tax collectors and inspectors here, if it's what I think, it's quite simple to ask you to die. If one dies, 2 will be added next month. Don't think too highly of yourself. Your lives are cheaper than a sheep. This today is just the initial warning. Starting tomorrow, What greets you is not a horse whip, but death. After saying these words, Sir John stepped on the black horse and left quickly with the rest of the militiamen. Everyone was stunned by him, and they looked at the fallen knight with pity. Their expressions were tense and their eyes were terrified. The threat of death was too scary then. An old man with a wrinkled face and a black and white beard came over and stood in front of everyone, holding a pen and a blank paper in his hand. Followed by two strong men. The strong man is carrying a box of things in both hands, which looks very strange. While everyone was still intimidated by the remaining power, they didn't say a word about the old man's appearance. Everyone, I am the administrative officer here. If you have any questions or difficulties in the future, you can come to me. The old man looked pleasant and easy to talk to. The one just now is Sir John Perrott, who stayed behind here. The whole town is dominated by him. Be careful not to provoke him, or the consequences will be unpredictable. Seeing that the immigrants were still a little timid, the old man explained softly. Next, everyone come to me to register first, with the family as the unit. As he spoke, the old man found a rock, sat on it, flipped through his notebook, and started to record with a pen in his right hand on the side. Two young men opened the box and took out bundles of palm-sized dried wooden strips, with strange patterns engraved on the back. Seeing this, Leonard didn't know that this was an immigrant household registration. He took his wife and children and became the first person to register. Name? Leonard Costland, 25 years old. The old man wrote his name in the notebook, and then wrote him in the head of the household column. Wife, Anna is 23 years old this year, daughter Buna is 7 years old this year, and son Desimone is 5 years old. After recording it, he, like his family, got a wooden board to record their names from the hands of the two young people, with the 3 words residence certificate written on it. Of course, it also briefly described the appearance of several of them. Next, hearing this sentence, Leonard immediately reacted and stepped aside. In fact, there are many people, most of them are families, and there are only 5 or 6 single men who form households alone. 75 was carrying his luggage, and now he was on the sidelines, waiting for the administrator to finish his work. After a while, after sorting things out, the old administrator continued, now, take the wooden signs in your hands, go to get your own clothes, and take a serious shower. With that said, the old administrator turned around, looked at the crowd and said, don't tell me that I dare not take a bath. His Majesty the King has called for it for several years. You should all be able to accept it now. Chapter 339 Bathing Movement. Although the administrator's eyes were cloudy, the sudden turn of his head still shocked the rest of the people. Of course. Everyone nodded. Their hair was a little disheveled. The administrator just smiled, then turned his head away and continued to walk his own steps. 2 years ago, 3 years after the introduction of the New Deal, our king wanted to test the results of this reform, and to change the customs of England. First of all, we have to make it clear that Europeans don't like to take a bath. This is a fake. The upper-class nobles and priests in Europe have always liked to take a bath. In the early Middle Ages, the nobles still maintained this good habit. However, the spread of the Black Death made the whole of Europe more and more afraid of bathing. One is religious, in order to maintain the chastity of the body, so as to dedicate more piously to God. This is usually related to religion, and there are fewer nobles and commoners. However, there are still some, such as Queen Victoria of later generations, known as the Queen of European Grandmothers. I didn't take a bath for decades, and I was canonized in the end. I was also drunk. The second is that in the late Middle Ages, when Genghis Khan's westward march, the Mongols not only brought war, but also brought a Black Death to Europe in order to siege, massacre, and unscrupulously throw animal carcasses to pollute water sources. This virus relapsed every few decades, tormenting Western Europeans to death, but it allowed them to develop the ability to be invulnerable to all poisons, and even used this feature to learn from Genghis Khan, and instead slaughtered Indians. Hundreds of people conquered an empire of millions after being tortured for hundreds of years. Europeans suddenly believed that water brought a Black Death. It is true that Genghis Khan threw dead bodies into rivers and wells to attack cities, but people must drink water. Otherwise they will all die. But the activity of bathing can be avoided. You won't die if you don't take a bath, even if your body stinks. It's better than death. So, from top to bottom, Europe has started a model of not bathing all year round, and is even proud of it. The third point is also a religious factor, because often fasted and bathed, and at that time Turkey was so powerful that it looked like it was going to swallow the Christian world, and those Mediterranean regions, as the front line, naturally became more and more nervous. And this is one of the ways to distinguish Christians from prostitutes, is to see if the body is relatively clean in order to prevent being mistaken for prostitutes. Civilians in the Mediterranean region naturally abandoned the custom of bathing. Moreover, the Church also believes that bathing is prone to desire, and as a Christian, one should abstain from sex, and there should be no way to violate the holy law such as bathing. They believe that hot baths tend to make people overly comfortable and make people have, that's farting in particular. Public bathhouses were directly related to public health at that time. After all, mixed bathing was very convenient for gods to fight in the 13th century. There were special guys who walked the streets of Paris to invite people to steam baths and bathtubs. These establishments were very common in Paris at that time, reaching 26 in 1292. The operation of steam rooms and tubs became an industry and entered everyday life. Showers are so popular that a steam bath is a common reward for some artisans, servants, and day laborers. The royal family gave Jean Petty and other valets a day's annual leave to take a steam bath, and it cost a total of 108 sous bed. Medieval European life and labor, law, P. Boissonne. It can be said that as a modern person, Our Majesty the King clearly stated in the newly printed Bible, under the guise of a sage, that the Black Death was not caused by bathing, but from rats, as for which saint said it. Edward said that he has been dead for hundreds of years. If you didn't say it, who knows? Anyway, it's on your head, and you can't escape. Moreover, Edward, in the name of the head of the state religion, asked the priests all over England to give detailed explanations to the common people. In addition to the religious aspect, Edward asked the Privy Council to draft a decree in the Privy Council, requiring major cities to build large-scale construction in cities with a standard of 1 public bathroom per 1,000 people. In this way, starting from religion and administration, the whole of England launched a vigorous bathing movement. According to the statistics of some scholars, in London alone, 2 public bathrooms have been established in every 1,000 household district. And the number of public bathrooms in London has reached 72. Since last year, the whole city suddenly seems to have changed. A group of people. The original citizens have all changed their appearance. Whether it is a skinny poor man or a rich businessman with a big belly, they are all so clean and cheerful at this time. I even have some doubts. To the kingdom of God, at this moment, the appearance of people suddenly became unified. If you ignore their clothes, they are no different, and it will be more and more difficult to identify them. At this time, I suddenly realized that the difference in identity is no longer an abyss, but a piece of clothing, although I still think that most of the young His Majesty's actions are wrong, but this time, it is rare to be right. From Oxford University, a scholar with a reputation in England, described it in his diary. Of course, the bathing movement has not been all smooth sailing in this world. There are still pious believers in Christ, including the elites of those societies, nobility for example. Such a letter of protest appeared in front of Edward. Behind it, there is a large series of signatures, the entire 39 counties of England. Each county has a signature on it. If you don't know the real lover, if you see this so-called petition letter, which is actually a protest letter, you will probably turn pale with shock. Even the king cannot offend the elites of the country, which symbolizes that the rule is in jeopardy. However, if you take a look, I'm afraid you will be dumbfounded. The content of such a protest letter has only one central idea, which is to end this nationwide bathing movement. The horrific consequences are either life and wealth, or the outbreak of the Black Death, or God's dissatisfaction. These words are repeated over and over again. In this regard, Edward has a headache. This is the first time since he succeeded to the throne that he has felt the oppression of the elite, and it is still for such a weird reason. The previous religious reforms, wars, taxation, and even local system reforms, these elites were indifferent, but the mere bathing movement was protested in less than 2 years. This made Edward really dumbfounded. Chapter 340 Dissatisfaction. The thick petition letter in front of him made Edward have to think about it. I remember that such a large-scale coercion of the king has never been attempted since the establishment of the Tudor dynasty, but it suddenly appeared in front of his eyes, which is very doubtful. Edward stood up and read each sentence of the petition letter in front of him, especially the signature column at the end, which was close to more than 200 people. There are not only knight, but also gentleman, squire, and even a rich yeoman, covering a wide range. Of course, if you think about it, none of them were real nobles. Don't think that jazz and knights are nobles. They are just reserved nobles, and they can only be compared with commoners. Compared with real nobles, they are not worth mentioning. The real nobles are honored as lords, and there are only more than 50. In England they are hereditary nobles who own their own land and servants. Even His Majesty the King has nothing to do with them unless they have committed any serious crimes, and from these nobles who have been passed down for hundreds of years, which one is not extremely shrewd, and the aftermath of the War of the Roses has not yet revived them. How could this embarrassing the king end in person? Therefore, Edward reckoned that these nobles must be hiding behind the scenes, acting as hidden operators. It seems that my series of actions over the past few years have made them afraid. This is an indirect expression of dissatisfaction with me. The corner of Edward's mouth twitched, and after thinking about it, he realized that the nobles were expressing their dissatisfaction with him. However, dissatisfaction is dissatisfaction. My bathing movement must be launched. I am the ruler of England. You can be dissatisfied, but you cannot resist, Edward whispered softly at the corner of his mouth, and cast his eyes out of the window. The busy pedestrians walked quickly, while the middle class with small bourgeoisie strolled leisurely. Whitehall Palace is the place where His Majesty the King lives, and there are no shops or houses, so Edward can only see all kinds of pedestrians. Even so, Edward can still find out from pedestrians how much London and England have changed compared to 5 years ago. I remember 5 years ago, when London was undergoing major renovations and the roads were clean and tidy, ordinary people on the road showed bitterness and confusion in their eyes. But now, the opening of the Iberian Peninsula and the entire Mediterranean trade route has allowed England's economy to take off, although ordinary people can't get much benefit. The leaked bonus still makes them a lot of money. A large number of factories stand on both sides of the Thames River, and the huge demand for workers has emptied the homeless people in England in an instant. In order to seek a large number of workers, the capitalists even began to lobby for an open land enclosure movement. After getting what they wanted, they turned to it and began to recruit slaves. The black slaves in Eastern Europe, Ireland, and even Africa made these greedy factory owners think of it. Edward is still satisfied with this move that indirectly increases the population of England and can also promote economic development. However, population, a resource that was still important in the 16th century, had just been taken from the hands of the nobility, so how could it be controlled by the capitalists? Therefore, in order to promote the normal development of commerce, and also to strengthen the national strength of England, Our Majesty the King officially declares, all slaves, when they landed in England, had to stay for 3 years before they could obtain permanent residency and British citizenship after that. Compared with ordinary Englishmen, except for the right to vote and 5% more tax, other rights are the same as those of Englishmen. Of course, it only applies to Europa, and white people, and Christians. Those black people, as well as, are not considered in this way. The capitalists only have 3 years of ownership of those who have been trafficked after that. Let's go. Having said that, the 3-year free labor still attracts factory owners for 3 years. They still made a lot of money, and then cheated into signing a long-term contract, even if they had to pay wages. But when the supply of workers in England was in short supply, the continuous operation of the factory was still very profitable. Edward, on the other hand, can get a huge population out of thin air, pay taxes, serve in the military, and drive England's economy to take off. Don't underestimate the population resources. The Netherlands, the sea coachman, because the population is not enough. He can't even get the sailors to drive the boat, so he finally changed his career to finance. Although there are factors of British suppression, the idea that the empire on which the sun never sets will go online ahead of schedule appeared in his mind, and Edward felt particularly relieved. England at this time is the edge of Europe, and its status is too low. Thinking of the kings of European countries prostrate in front of me, and me playing with their queens unscrupulously, but they dare not speak out. It's really refreshing thinking about it. Edward unconsciously opened his mouth wide, drooling unceasingly. Ding ding. A knock on the door woke Edward up. He restrained his expression, returned to his seat and sat down. Edward said casually, "Come in, Your Majesty. His Excellency Speaker Alexander has arrived, as his secretary." Laura reported truthfully without any fluctuation in her tone. "Let him in." "Yes, your servant, Ferris Alexander, has met His Majesty, Your Excellency." The speaker seemed to be still a little energetic, and he greeted Edward loudly. Regarding this, Edward smiled in his heart. He didn't understand that the speaker, His Excellency, was still reluctant to part with a position under his buttocks. However, 5 years is long enough. Like the current bureaucratic rule in England, a long-term high position is a threat to the royal power. "Dear sir, please sit down. I invite you here this time. I have an important matter to discuss with you." Edward was sitting upright, with a serious look on his face, which made His Excellency the Speaker, who had always liked his laziness, subconsciously solemn. "You know this petition?" Edward pointed to the petition letter on the desk and said, "Of course. I handed this to you myself." Doubt appeared on the speaker's face, and he looked at the king with some confusion. "What do you see in that?" Edward continued this. Ferris looked at the petition letter hesitantly, then looked at His Majesty the King, and said, "It's okay. Keep talking. It seems that the nobles are dissatisfied with the central government. Speaking, Ferris glanced at the young king timidly, and said in a low voice, of course Edward knew that the central government was just a cover, and it was actually referring to himself. This kind of dissatisfaction needs to be resolved, and the poor noble needs the care of His Majesty the King. Chapter 341 Steam Bath. Hot water was poured on the wooden floor, and when it came into contact with a wet floor, bursts of water vapor instantly evaporated, covering the entire spacious hall in white, and the hairs of the whole body relaxed compared with a humid and slightly cold temperature outside. It is comfortable here, which makes people unconsciously let go of their minds. More than a dozen young maids were wearing short jackets, revealing their white and tender arms and thighs. The short jackets were moist with moisture in the air, and they were tightly fitted in the water mist. The youthful maid smiled at Yan Yan, disregarding her own happiness, but step by step scooped out spoonfuls of hot water from the hot water bucket beside her, poured it evenly on the floor, and filled the room. The water vapor that gradually dissipates inside adds strength in the steamy room. There are 3 large bathtubs. Inside the bathtubs, 3 noblemen in their 30s are lying naked in the bathtubs. 2 pretty white and tender maids are kneeling beside them. Just like any other maid in the past, the 3 nobles lying in the bathtub would have already started the action meeting, but now, the 3 of them frowned, and there was no desire at all in their hearts. Obviously, their hearts were full of haze at this time. Baron Burnley, a baron of Herefordshire, has long flaxen hair. Compared with other nobles, he looks extraordinarily quiet. The Earl of Chester in Cheshire was a young man with an immature face. He looked a little confused, or rather he had no opinion and followed the crowd. The remaining one was Baron Barnsley of South Yorkshire. He had long blonde hair, an eagle nose, and thin lips. Combined with the gloomy eyes at this time, he was particularly gloomy and frightening. I can't go on like this anymore. I'm almost driven crazy by this young king. The gloomy Baron Barnsley looked forward and said loudly. After speaking, he turned his eyes to the other 2 barons with unhappy faces. Yes, in the past few years, we have either banned us from enclosing land, or made some local reforms. It's very annoying. In my opinion, he is more trouble than his father. If this continues, I will go crazy. The young Baron Chester heard Barnsley's complaint and said in agreement, what's more important is, what kind of exams are there to be an official? When will those commoners be qualified to sit on an equal footing with their blue-blooded nobles, and even speak very aggressively? As soon as Baron Chester mentioned this, he immediately became interested, and his whole body seemed to be inflated. His skin, which had been soaked and flushed, became even more rosy now, and the veins on his neck twitched. You said, it is a small mayor who dared to knock on the door of my house, and even sarcastically satirized me, saying to me, Your Excellency, as a nobleman, you should pay attention to the dignity of the nobleman, and you should not do something that violates the nobleman's dignity. A matter of honor. Thinking of this, Baron Chester's eyes became sharper. You say, I just whipped a few ordinary people who spoke rudely in front of me? As a nobleman, this is my right. As he spoke, Baron Chester became resentful on the side. Baron Burnley, who was listening quietly with his eyes closed and ears pricked up, slowly opened his eyes and glanced at Baron Chester, with inexplicable emotions flashing in his eyes. My Baron, don't complain anymore, don't you know? These common people, we have no right to whip the whip anymore, otherwise, the local court will summon us and give us a big embarrassment. Baron Barnsley at the side heard the words, and the haze in his eyes lessened a lot. Sure enough, with a sympathetic person, the scars in his heart were much less. The local court is nothing, at most it will embarrass you. If you are completely targeted by the hounds of the Star Room Court, then you will eat something. Baron Barnsley sneered and comforted him, but when he mentioned the Star Chamber Court, Baron Chester immediately fell silent. The 3 people in the bathroom immediately felt a chill from the bottom of their hearts. If the Star Chamber Court is a judicial institution, the Palace Intelligence Office is a vicious dog, using its own nose to sniff out all kinds of deeds of those nobles and officials. It is simply unbearable. According to rough statistics, in the past few years, because of the Palace Intelligence Department, the number of nobles who have been arrested into the Star Room Court has reached 12, of which 2 were revoked their titles, and the rest have paid large sums of fines. And you must know that after the death of Henry VIII, there were only 51 hereditary nobles in England, and this number was already terrifying. Countless officials were arrested in the Star Room Court, and then the whole family was immigrated to Ireland together. It can be said that the entire English aristocrats are extremely uncomfortable with this situation of being constantly monitored and fear. Baron Barnsley, do you think it will be counterproductive if we do this? You know, this young king has a very stubborn personality, and he can't play cards according to common sense. Baron Burnley, who listened with pricked ears, couldn't help but whispered, "It's all right, Monsieur Baron. Let's not be so timid. Send a letter of petition to let His Majesty the King understand our situation and dissatisfaction." Those higher-ranking nobles cherished their feathers one by one, for fear of provoking His Majesty's dissatisfaction. His Majesty the King is not so strict with us! Exclamation mark. Speaking of sternness, Baron Barnsley emphasized his tone and gritted his teeth. "How can I be happy in my heart when I am half forced to do things?" Holding up a handful of water with both hands, gently blowing a layer of ripples, and then spreading the hands, the water fell into the tub again. Baron Barnsley's words left the two speechless. After being served by the maid, they put on their clothes and walked out of the bathroom. The three chatted from time to time, and with the passage of time, the three of them finally calmed down about making guns, and felt a lot more comfortable at this time. The butler ran over, with a little sweat on his forehead because of the trot. "Master, Your Excellency, the two barons, the palace secretariat has sent an invitation. His Majesty the King wants to see you." Seeing the three of them, the housekeeper bent over and spoke word by word, enunciating clearly. "What? His Majesty wants to see us," the three of them said suddenly without a trace of joy in their voices. Chapter 342 County Council. For the nobles, it was certainly a pleasure to be summoned by His Majesty the King, but at this time, for the three of them, His Majesty the King must have other plans. Came to London with a mood full of ups and downs. This time, the three of them met His Majesty the King with fear. Unexpectedly, His Majesty the King met with the three of them in a pleasant manner, and from time to time he learned about interesting things about their place, and by the way, asked them to express their views on the New Deal. Seeing that His Majesty the King did not intend to blame himself and the others, Baron Chester and the other three immediately felt relieved their nervousness, and began to talk about the interesting things about the county where the three of them were located fluently. Edward listened with a smile on his face, and expressed his opinions from time to time. Suddenly, the entire reception room was filled with a pleasant atmosphere. Finally, seeing that the atmosphere finally became harmonious, Edward talked about the petition letter. "For your petition letter, I think." As soon as His Majesty the King mentioned the words of petition letter, the smiles of the three barons who had been smiling before froze. When Edward said this, he paused, his azure blue eyes looked at the three people who were standing still, and a smile slowly emerged from the corner of his mouth, and the three barons immediately raised their hearts. Their hearts were beating, thumping, and they stared blankly at the king's lips, fearing that the next sentence would be an abyss. "I think, in fact, there is still some truth to speak of, which has benefited me a lot." With a full expression on Edward's face, he said with emotion, "Although your names are not signed on it, I still see your loyalty to the royal family." The three people who were going to plead guilty suddenly heard such a turning point. Not only did the three of them have nothing to do, but they had meritorious deeds. This made the three of them full of puzzlement. Seeing this, Edward did not pay attention to their expressions, but stood up and said happily, "I can still see your loyalty to the royal family. I am very happy about it. If other nobles can be like you and wholeheartedly think about the royal family, then the whole of Scotland has already surrendered." Speaking of this, the three barons couldn't bear to let His Majesty the King perform alone, and began to mix in. "It's all thanks to His Majesty's blessing that Scotland was annexed. It can be seen that the almighty God has always been attached to the royal family," said the Baron Burnley flatteringly. "Having said that, governing the country cannot always be smooth sailing, and you will always encounter various difficulties. I have been in London with the ministers of the Privy Council, and there are inevitably omissions in policies, and at this time, we need a lot of help from you nobles who have been in the place all year round." Edward looked at the flattering expressions on the faces of the three, and said earnestly, "Of course, it is our nobles' duty to be loyal to the royal family. We will definitely offer advice and suggestions on this." "Yes, it must be so," the three barons said with certainty. "The tone should be as sincere as possible. I have no doubts about your loyalty, but if you use a letter of love every time, it would be too grand." Speaking of the letter of love again, although the king had a smile on his face, the aura of the three barons shrank immediately, their hearts rose again, and a trace of embarrassment appeared on their faces. Seeing this, Edward also knew that this meeting was rewarding, and his smile became brighter and brighter. "Of course, I also know that everyone wants to serve the royal family. It is inevitable that they will be impulsive. I can understand." Hearing this, the three barons breathed a sigh of relief again, but their moods were still tense. They were made miserable by His Majesty's startled words, "So it's better to be careful." Edward stood for a while, then sat down again. The House of Lords does not convene frequently, and it is difficult for you to convey your opinions to my ears. I am still somewhat at fault for this. Nothing. Your Majesty is not wrong. It's all our fault. To comfort the three of them, Edward shook his head lightly, and said excitedly, since the House of Lords is still lacking, I want to make up for it. Speaking of this, Our Majesty the King stood up again, and the three barons also stood up, as if listening. Laura, write it down and send it to the Privy Council and Parliament later. This is my proposal, Edward called out, and after Laura came in, he ordered from now on, each county will set up a council with 23 members. Members will be appointed by local gentlemen and nobles. The candidates will be jointly selected by the House of Lords and the Privy Council, and then appointed by the King. The county council is responsible for supervising local finances and corruption of local officials. It has the ability to impeach any officials to the Privy Council and the King, and it can also directly file a letter to the Privy Council. However, we must remember that the county council does not have any power to recall or even interfere with local judicial and administrative rights, but only has the right to supervise officials. In the end, Edward emphasized the word supervision, which is very meaningful of course. The three barons are the new county councillors of each county, and there is no need to submit candidates. It's my honor. Seeing this, the three of them said in unison, with surprise on their faces and radiant eyes. Seeing this, Edward just smiled slightly. From the moment we met, it was all just acting. Even if it is to establish a county council, he had already discussed it with Ferris, the Speaker of the Privy Council, earlier, and even the House of Lords had already read it for the first time, and only waited for the House of Commons to read it for the second time. The establishment of the county council had long been mentioned in Edward's mind, but this time it was just established in advance. For this reason, after the centralization of power, although the royal family's control over the whole of England has been greatly enhanced, at the same time, the bureaucratic team of the whole of England has grown rapidly like a balloon. According to statistics, in the 39 counties of England, the total number of employees, from small local officials to high-ranking county officials, has reached 10,000. What kind of concept is this? This is equivalent to one official among 300 Englishmen. Almost half of England's tax revenue is spent on this group of people. With such a huge team, good and bad are naturally mixed, and all kinds of corrupt officials emerge endlessly in the past few years. If we say that the busiest agency is nothing more than the Palace Intelligence Service, it has almost become England's anti-corruption bureau. In the past few years, there have been fewer and fewer refugees and local riots. Among the immigrants exiled to Scotland, the proportion of corrupt officials and their families is increasing day by day. In view of this, Edward finally decided that it is still necessary to set up the necessary supervisory institutions, and it must not consume salaries, so that the government agencies will no longer be bloated. And this is, the county council suddenly appeared in Edward's mind. Chapter 343. The political situation in England. Following the ancient tradition in England, local gentlemen held official positions and obliged to serve the king. Moreover, in the local counties, the county council only has the right to supervise, and the number of members is determined by the central government. In this way, the local county council can be controlled to the greatest extent. At present, the power of the local government is a bit too large, or it is much greater than before. In this way, the officials in the county cannot control their desires, and even unite with the local families to conspire. And if a county council is established, those nobles and gentlemen who originally disdained to be officials will artificially oppose those officials. One supervision, one administration. In this way, the local area will not be a pool of stagnant water, which is conducive to the control of the central government. Moreover, in order to centralize power, the Privy Council also issued a decree requiring all officials to serve no more than 4 years, and after 4 years, the central government will decide on the appointment. In the 4 years, the first year was used as an adaptation and understanding. The second and third years were used as the governance of local officials, and the fourth year was the end. In this era of short human life expectancy, this is almost 1/10 of the life of ordinary people. The head of the 100 households district is appointed by the county, and then submitted to the central government's files. The head of the 1,000 households district and the ministers of the county follow the example of the central government, and they are drafted by the Privy Council. After the king approves, they can take office. As for the candidates for the sheriffs of England's 39 counties, the Privy Council will select from among the many district chiefs. There will be 3 people in each county, and then they will be approved by the king. After that, the local county chief can be promoted to the central government, and then he can become the deputy director of each department of the Privy Council, and then promoted to the director, deputy minister, minister of the Privy Council, Vice President of the Privy Council, and Speaker of the Privy Council. As mentioned earlier, the central government is dominated by the Privy Council, which is divided into 9 departments: foreign affairs, finance, agriculture and commerce, engineering, construction, religion, supervision, social security, education, and the organization department that manages the promotion of officials. According to the ancient tradition of England, England is divided into 8 parts: North East England, North West England, Yorkshire and the Humber, West Central England, East Central England, East England, South West England, and South East England. Each department has a minister and 2 deputy ministers, and there are 8 departments under it, and each department corresponds to each section above it. That is to say, each department is responsible for a set of things in those counties. Each department has a director and 2 deputy directors, as well as several personnel. If you have taken the England official admissions test, your promotion route is as follows: Chief of 100 districts, District Chief, County Minister, Deputy Director, Director, Deputy Minister, Minister, Privy Councillor, Vice President or Speaker. If you stay in each position for 4 years, congratulations, after 32 years, you may become the top official of the Privy Council, the Speaker of the Privy Council. Of course, this is just a smooth sailing situation. Some accidents and ups and downs are inevitable in this world. This is the norm in officialdom. However, if there really is such a person, after such a lot of experience, then he must be an elite among the elite, with extremely high EQ and IQ, and it must be easy to manage the whole of Britain for this era. Although the king is still the main factor that determines whether a country is strong or not, it is important to have a group of ministers with outstanding abilities and broad knowledge, which is an important support for a country's strength. We know that in this era, nobles are the elites of society and important helpers in governing the country. However, the hereditary system of the nobility makes it extremely easy for this class to be corrupted, and the chance of an elite being born is too small. For example, in France later, in the 18th century, why did the Bourbon dynasty fall? Among them, the nobles as the ruling class were corrupt and greedy and stingy. They contributed to the end of the Bourbon dynasty in England. In addition to counties, there are also a large number of municipalities. Of course, the existence of municipalities is the result of the Magna Carta. Article 13 of the Magna Carta stipulates that all free cities such as London should enjoy the right to freedom, and the king must not interfere or occupy them, and, importantly, the free city can elect members of the House of Commons in order to further disperse the power of the House of Commons and strengthen the royal power. Henry VIII and later Elizabeth I granted some emerging cities as free cities. As a result, the House of Commons slowly expanded, and the Crown's control over the Parliament was greatly enhanced. It was the turn of the Stuarts to enjoy the consequences, and the House of Commons began to challenge the Crown. After seeing the 3 barons and finishing the scene, Edward was relieved. At present, the English aristocracy is still somewhat weak. Unlike the times of Henry VI and Henry VIII, the power of the nobility seems too weak. When a large number of civilians enter the government, they will inevitably seize a lot of power. At this time, the existence of the nobles will form a balance with the power of the civilians, and the king is between the 2 forces, both ways. In the later Glorious Revolution, the nobles advocated keeping the royal family, while the bourgeoisie wanted a republic. Only in this way did the Bill of Rights come into being and the royal family survived. In fact, even before World War I, the British royal family still had great power. Unlike the stamping of the 21st century during the First World War, a large number of noble children joined the army, but the huge casualties caused many nobles to become extinct. For the royal family, this was no less than the War of the Roses in the 15th century. But at this time, the attitude of the royal family is completely different. Excessive consumption of the power of the nobles means that the power of the common people officially dominates the power of the United Kingdom, and the royal family has truly become a rubber stamp. Generally speaking, until now, the power of the nobles needs to increase to become the help of the royal family to rule the country. On the local level, the county government and the county council check and balance each other, and on the central level, the nobles and civilian officials check and balance each other. Balance is Edward's pursuit. On the whole, the capitalists began to rise, and the bureaucracy was an important force to contain capitalism. In other words, capitalism in England developed under the watchful eye and control of the bureaucracy. The coach of England can only continue to develop under the leadership of His Majesty the King. For Edward, it would mean nothing if Britain became the world's hegemon and he was not the leader. Instead, Edward preferred to have England become a European power, under Spain and France, and to have England under the rule of the Crown. It can be said that, for the most part, England's interests were aligned with those of the Tudors. However, sometimes, Edward would rather sacrifice the interests of England, but also to preserve the interests of the Tudor royal family. The best example of this kind of conflict and contradiction is the Soviet period, when the officials sold out their national interests wantonly. After the disintegration of the Soviet Union, they became oligarchs one by one, and never cared about the situation in the Soviet Union. Chapter 344. After finishing these tasks, the rest of the convening of the council, the establishment of the county council, and the selection of members are all the affairs of the Privy Council and have nothing to do with His Majesty the King. The details are left to these ministers. Our Majesty the King is going to see his son and daughter. Hampton Court Palace, a side hall, has an area of about 100 square meters, and like all palaces, it looks resplendent. However, unlike other palaces, there is no table, chair or other furniture with bumping corners in the palace. It can be said that if you are tired, you can only sit on the ground and rest for a while on the floor of the side hall. The bottom is covered with Persian carpets, and the top is covered with goose down, and various toys are played in it: rocking chairs, slides, seesaws, building blocks, animal models, etc. It can be said that Edward does not allow the existence of items that harm infants and young children. This was Edward racking his brains, recalling the toys he had seen, and urging the craftsmen to make them carefully. Although the three children are only about a month old, when they can crawl, this will come in handy. Of course, it's just a fantasy right now. When Edward passed by, he went in and took a look, and saw that the craftsmen had made all the toys, but the shining golden walls were very dazzling for babies. For the surrounding walls, Edward invited a famous painter to paint the prairie on the left side, with various animals moving around, cute and free. On the opposite wall, the sea is painted. A merchant ship barely sails in the storm, trying to keep the ship on the front. There are maps of England and Europa. Of course, it is the kind of country map with color differences that we often see, which is simple and easy to understand. On the other hand, Edward asked to paint portraits of famous English kings, so that these children could remember these heroic deeds from an early age. These were not easy. Edward gathered nearly 30 muralists, and compressed the time into 8 months. It took 8 months to finish the painting, and then let it dry for another 2 or 3 months. By that time, the three little guys had already learned to crawl, and it was just in time to use it. The entry of His Majesty the King only made these artists bow slightly, and then continued to work on their fellows. Edward didn't take it seriously. Artists always have a somewhat arrogant temper. After observing for a few minutes, Edward felt the smell of the paint was a bit offensive, rubbed his nose, and glanced at the artists who were still painting murals there. Edward had to admire their stubbornness for the sake of his own safety. Edward left this place with the maids and guards following him. After finishing his mood, Edward came to a bedroom, which was the bedroom of his 3 illegitimate children in the court. Princes and princesses are taken care of by special nuns, and there are also wet nurses to breastfeed. Moreover, for better care, Edward specially arranged for the 3 little ones to live in the same nursery room, so that they could see each other with open eyes. The 3 nurses waited in turn, and the 6 wet nurses lived and ate in the next room. Your Majesty, the guard standing outside the nursery, upon seeing His Majesty the King, bent down mechanically and greeted him softly. Be careful next time, when you see me, don't say it out loud. Edward nodded, then turned his head and ordered softly, Yes, Your Majesty. The 4 guards nodded without hesitation and agreed. Forget it, forgive this era. They are all mentally handicapped with underdeveloped brains. After Edward muttered something in his heart, he slowed down and walked in gently. What came into view were 3 cribs, 3 tightly wrapped little ones, with rosy cheeks and small lips, wriggling from time to time, as if they were having a good dream. Your Majesty. After saluting, the 3 nuns were about to speak, but were stopped by Edward directly. Don't be too polite, I just want to see my babies. Edward carefully glanced at the 3 sleeping little guys, and said softly the 3 nuns were not so mentally retarded. Instead, they stood aside tactfully, making room for His Majesty the King. 3 rows of cribs stand side by side, followed by the eldest son Henry, the eldest daughter Alice, and the second son Adam. Unlike when they first met, the 3 little guys at this time have grown short hair, and they are no longer bald. The eldest Henry looks thick, with a round face, mainly black hair, and his facial features look very regular. The little guy stayed in his cradle, well behaved, did not inherit Lucy's naughtiness, but was very similar to Luna. He seemed to sleep very comfortably and was very cute. The eldest daughter, Alice, was different. Her skin was the smoothest, while Edward felt like tofu, and her hair was greenish and a little black. The right hand sticks out irregularly from the quilt, dancing from time to time, and it looks like a naughty guy in the future. And the innermost Adam, not to be outdone, stretched out his left leg, motionless, and seemed a little hot seeing this. The nuns at the side couldn't control the king's presence, and hurriedly pulled his right leg in, and tucked Alice's arm into the bed. By the way, the two little guys were not so easy to be settled. Not long after they were stuffed in, they stretched out their arms and legs. Then the mammy quickly stuffed it in, stretched it out, stuffed it in, and back and forth, tossing and tossing. Several mammies sweating profusely. The eldest son, Henry, who stayed outside, fell asleep with gusto, and the saliva slowly flowed out, soaking the pillow. Seeing this, Edward watched with great interest, and had a deep understanding of his two little guys. He walked to his eldest son, who was soundly asleep, looked closely into his little eyes, and said softly, "You are still the most obedient. This will save you a lot of worry." Unexpectedly, just after Edward finished speaking, his closed eyes suddenly opened, revealing two blue eyeballs, blinked, and looked at the king in front of him. Suspiciously caught off guard, Edward pursed his lips and burst into tears, which embarrassed the young king. As a man in two lives, he was a father for the first time. When he encountered this scene, he was caught off guard for a while, recalling the picture that appeared on TV. She gently hugged him with both hands, patted his back gently with her right hand, and coaxed him under the astonished gaze of the nanny. The matter did not go according to Edward's expectation, and the little guy cried louder instead. As a result, the two little fellows next to him also opened their eyelids. Without even looking, they just cried loudly, leaving the young king speechless. The whole room suddenly became chaotic. "Your Majesty, leave it to me." The nurse on the side stretched out her hands and said softly, "If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelists. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels." Chapter 345: The Flower and the Girl. The three guys didn't give Edward any face at all. They were crying one after another. It felt like the whole roof was about to collapse, and there were buzzing sounds in their ears. Looking at Henry in his arms, and then at Alice and Adam, who opened their mouths to cry, Edward had no choice but to give up. "Give it to you. This little guy doesn't give me face at all. What a naughty guy." Edward gently straightened little Henry with both hands, and then slowly sent it to the hand of the nurse, who stretched out his hand. With a helpless expression on his face, his eyes were fixed on his eldest son's face, and when he saw that he had been coaxed a few times by the nanny, he shook it again. In less than a minute, the little guy stopped, and then the nurse at the side walked over quietly. Her cheeks were flushed, and she looked at His Majesty the King shyly on the other side. The two little guys were also in Mammy's arms. The voice slowly stopped, and the two nurses also approached, looking at the little guy's crystal clear eyeballs. There was a longing look inside. Then Edward took another look. The nurse who was serving beside him had a pretty face and a broad mind, which was extraordinarily broad. Seeing this, Edward kissed the tender faces of the three little guys lightly, and then chose to leave without hesitation. "It's cheaper for you. What a lucky little guy." With a soft mutter on his lips, Edward left the nursery. Just after he left, the three wet nurses held up the skirts of their chests and let the three little ones have a full meal. The presence of His Majesty the King made them a little shy, and there were so many guards accompanying them. Even if you don't mind His Majesty the King, but with so many people, some open minds disappeared immediately. Walking out of the nursery, Edward looked at the three pauperous who were still in confinement, and then came to the backyard. In the spacious backyard, surrounded by a dozen maids, there are several beautiful girls standing in the middle, wearing various skirts, shining brightly under the sunlight. Edward took a closer look and saw his older sister in the middle, Her Highness Elizabeth in a green dress, and the youthful and innocent girl with long red hair and ponytails, the young Queen Mary, on the other side of them. Queen Mary sat aside with a kind face. She no longer had the old-fashioned and serious look on her body. Instead, she was wearing a long white dress, and a precious necklace hung around her slender, white neck. "Your Majesty." The sharp-eyed maid immediately bent down and saluted. As soon as she saw the figure of His Majesty the King, the maid's salute immediately made Mary and the others react. They all lowered their heads and hurriedly held their skirts. A soft greeting sounded in Edward's ears. "Your Majesty is very polite. Elizabeth, Mary, you are very beautiful today." Edward first greeted the elder Queen Mother Mary, and then warmly praised the young girl Mary and his sister, Elizabeth. Princess Elizabeth, who is wearing a long green dress, is 23 years old this year, but standing next to the youthful Mary, they are almost indistinguishable. Mary in the pink dress is also 15 years old this year. Just last year, Edward and her had an engagement ceremony. The wedding will be arranged for next year, when she is 16. Thinking of this, and looking at her immature face, Every time Edward would say a few words of amitabha in his heart. "Edward, why are you here?" Elizabeth asked in surprise as she watched her younger brother slowly approaching. "Since he returned to London for a month, he has been busy all day long, and he rarely misses a day." So Elizabeth was a little surprised. "It's nothing, I'll come and see my beautiful sister, she's become a lot prettier recently." Edward looked into Elizabeth's blue eyes and said with a smile, "Don't say good things in front of me, Edward, I really admire you." In a blink of an eye, 2 sons and 1 daughter came out. Looking at her only younger brother, Elizabeth complained. Even so, the corners of her mouth were still slightly raised. It was obvious that Edward's flattery still benefited her. "Humph." Queen Mary heard the words, looked sideways at Edward, and let out a cold snort in her throat. Then he stood up on his own, with a beautiful peach-like buttocks, and walked away in a flash. Seeing this, Edward touched the tip of his nose in embarrassment, and watched Queen Mary leave without explaining anything. He understood that Queen Mary was angry not because of the illegitimate child. It is normal for a nobleman to have an illegitimate child, just like eating and sleeping. The reason for his anger was that he raised his illegitimate child in the palace, under their noses, and he couldn't stand it personally. After watching her mother leave, Mary on the side puffed up her face and turned her head angrily, as if I ignored you. But her wandering eyeballs, sneaking glances at him from time to time, made Edward feel a little funny. "I have cultivated for many years, and finally saw the effect. Sure enough, my wife, I still need to cultivate from a young age." "Dumb." Edward snapped his fingers, and the guard beside him quickly brought a bouquet of red roses. "Oh, this bouquet is so beautiful. I want to give it to the beautiful Mary, but why can't I see the beautiful lady?" Holding flowers in his hands, Edward looked around pretendingly, muttering inadvertently, with anxiety in his tone, "Or, Edward, give it to me. It would be a pity if we can't find Mary." "Give it to me." Elizabeth blinked at Edward, then raised the corners of her mischievous mouth, and said loudly on purpose. As she said that, she stretched out her white and tender arms, and was about to bring the flowers over, but Edward was a little embarrassed. "It's not good, nothing, Mary isn't here anyway." Elizabeth stretched out her hand recklessly, and the moment her fingers were about to touch the flower, a delicate arm suddenly stretched out from the side and snatched the rose. "It's mine, Elizabeth, you can't take it away." In a blink of an eye, the rose was in the hands of the young girl Mary. She first gave Edward an angry look, and then couldn't help it any more, and burst out laughing, and with a cute voice, she rolled her eyes and said to Elizabeth, who wanted to steal her flowers, "Oh, what a pity, I thought I could receive a bouquet of roses today." Elizabeth showed a disappointed expression and cooperation, and then said to Edward with a little deep meaning, her eyes complicated, "HMPH, this is my flower, you should give up." "Elizabeth, it smells so good." As she said that, she deliberately sniffed hard with her nose, showing an intoxicated and satisfied smile, where there was no trace of anger. Seeing this, Edward gave himself a thumbs up in his heart. "Amazing, My Majesty the King. Of course, the credit of Princess Elizabeth is also great." Chapter 346, Reforming the Inheritance Law. At the time when Edward and Mary were happily chatting, the Palace of Westminster and the meeting hall of the Privy Council were extremely lively. In the conference hall hung an oil painting of Henry VIII, wearing armor, a crown on his head, and a short sword on his waist. The background was the city walls of Paris, France. This is not only to show Edward's respect for Henry VIII, but also to remind this group of politicians in the ruling center of England not to forget the long-cherished wish of the former King. France. In front of the oil painting, there was a long table, smeared with tune oil, and the main seat was empty, which belonged to His Majesty the King, while the deputy seat belonged to the most powerful person under the King of England, the Speaker of the Privy Council. Thanks to the centralization of power in England, the position of Speaker of the Privy Council has become very popular. And even the hereditary nobles with prominent families are also greedy for this position. This year is His Excellency Fairess Alexander's last year as the Speaker of the Privy Council. Therefore, with respect for him, many ministers are still polite to him, at least not as fierce as before. However, it was still difficult for many ministers to conceal their shock and surprise when they suddenly heard such a message from His Majesty the King, because, at the previous moment, His Excellency Fairess personally delivered a message to them, with only one central meaning. His Majesty the King will change the traditional inheritance law of the nobles. With such strong impact words, it was difficult for many ministers to calm down the shock in their hearts for a while. "Your Excellency Speaker, let me ask you a question. How will His Majesty the King change the tradition of noble inheritance?" At this time, just as the speaker finished speaking, the man sitting on the chair suddenly stood up. His tone was a little anxious, but his movements were still steady, calm, And a gentleman Ferris looked up and saw a slender middle-aged man with a thin beard and a thin face stood up, lowered his head slightly, bent down, and looked at him suspiciously. This is William Cecil, the first Mayor of London, the former Sheriff of Oxfordshire, currently the Deputy Speaker of the Privy Council, the sure successor of the Speaker of the Privy Council, and the candidate appointed by His Majesty the King. The same was true for the other ministers, who looked at him with doubts on their faces, and the searching look in their eyes was extremely obvious, which made him feel a pressed cough. "Your Excellency," the Speaker coughed, and then many ministers restrained their expressions and sat upright. After glancing at William Cecil, he immediately glanced at the other ministers present with a serious expression, and said loudly, "His Majesty the King summoned me today," and felt saddened by the gradual decline of the aristocratic class. Therefore, he believes that the current aristocratic succession law is too strict and needs to be cut down to satisfy the rule of the kingdom. After all, we need to understand that nobility is the basis for maintaining the rule of the entire England, and England cannot live without nobility. So, the King asked us to draft a new succession bill to meet the current situation in England. As soon as the words were finished, many ministers breathed a sigh of relief. It turned out that His Majesty the King hadn't drawn up the bill yet, and they thought the King wanted to be arbitrary again. They have no right to change the decrees that have been drafted by His Majesty the King, but now it is different. If His Majesty the King asks them to draft, then there is some room for change on the side. Not only Vice President William Cecil breathed a sigh of relief, but the other ministers also relaxed a lot. There are dozens of ministers in the Privy Council, and the most important ones are those sitting in the meeting. The other ministers are just working as secretaries. The sitting ministers are counted from the left-hand side of Ferris, followed by Earl Boswell, Vice President of the Privy Council, Barman Randall, Vice President of the Privy Council, and Lord Seal, Earl Robert, Minister of the Privy Council and Chief Justice, and Earl Robert of the Privy Council, Minister and Secretary of State Don Francis, and Sir Kyle Lance. These 7 people are recognized by His Majesty the King, and they are also ministers who are often summoned by His Majesty the King. They belong to default state, of course, nominally speaking, except for His Excellency the Speaker. The status of other ministers is equal. So, Honorable Mr. Speaker, what is His Majesty's request? This time, it was the turn of the Vice Principal, Earl Boswell, to ask questions. As one of the top figures in England during the Regency Council, Earl Boswell is the most powerful figure in the Privy Council after Ferris. It can be said that he is the most suitable successor for Ferris. However, the Emperor and the courtiers, although Edward did not do anything, he more or less heard some hints, and said in a timely manner that he would retire with Ferris. Glancing at Earl Boswell, who looked a little tired, His Excellency the Speaker said softly, "At present, it is not uncommon for noble heirs to fall, or only female heirs. We can start with this then. We can think about legalizing female inheritance. After all, this situation is not uncommon in continental Europe. If it is changed, it will be easily accepted by the nobles." William Cecil thought for a while, and immediately proposed, and then fixed his eyes on the Speaker. When Ferris heard the words, he was interrupted just as he was about to speak. "No, absolutely not." The Keeper of the Seal, Barman Randall, denied his proposal, looked at William Cecil seriously, and said firmly, "It would be better for those titles to be cut than for those women to inherit them. This is an insult to the nobility. What's more, by marrying a woman, one can become a hereditary nobleman. So what is the nobility of our blue blood? Is it not defiled?" The Conservative minister Barman Randall is a viscount, over 60 years old, and he is becoming more and more conservative. The English aristocrats despise the European habit of inheriting titles by marrying women. For them, the blood of the nobility should not be tarnished. I agree, this matter is absolutely not allowed. It is not in line with tradition. Other ministers also expressed their opposition and rejected the proposal. Well, since most people are against it, those who allow women to inherit titles should not be presented to His Majesty the King. Seeing that his proposal was denied, William Cecil smiled nonchalantly and sat down. He knew that his proposal would be rejected, and the conservative tradition still imprisoned the English. Even though the other ministers are not nobles, they still oppose his proposal because of their worship of noble titles and belief in noble traditions. After William Cecil's proposal was rejected, the other ministers fell silent. Obviously, it is hard to think of a way to achieve the best of both worlds. Seeing this, Ferris Alexander suddenly showed an inscrutable smile on his face. Chapter 347 New Inheritance Law. The English aristocrats are quite conservative in inheriting family property. Generally speaking, if a nobleman has no direct relatives, that is, sons, such as brothers and nephews, his title will be cancelled, and the family property and title will also belong to the royal family. For example, the Duke of York, which has a large family property, has now been incorporated into the royal family. This long-standing title has become the title of the king if you only have a daughter. Then if you want her to inherit the title, you must obtain the approval of His Majesty the King. After that, after inheriting the title, her descendants will no longer enjoy the title, ending in her generation. A male heir is the greatest pursuit of the English nobles. However, this kind of small wish, due to monogamy and frequent marriages between nobles, caused genetic diseases. Even if male heirs were born, they would die young. For example, according to historical arrangements, the Tudor dynasty will be after Henry VIII, Edward VI will die without heirs, Queen Mary will succeed to the throne without heirs, Queen Elizabeth will never marry, the Tudor dynasty will be extinct, and Stuart of Scotland will have no heirs. The Arthur dynasty ruled England. In fact, before Edward was born, Henry VIII already had a beloved illegitimate son. Before Edward was born, he was the most likely and the heir that Henry VIII wanted to support. Henry Fitzroy, 1519 to 1536, the illegitimate son of Henry VIII, was named Duke of Richmond, Duke of Somerset, and Earl of Nottingham by Henry VIII when he was 6 years old, 1525. Among them, the Duke of Richmond has his own duchy, and the other Dukes of Somerset and the Earl of Nottingham are only court nobles. It can be said that before Edward was born, Henry VIII had been thinking about how to support him on the throne. Even if it was to change the inheritance tradition, he had to be supported on the throne. No one dared to doubt the courage of His Majesty the King. After all, in order to marry the Queen and have children, even the Pope was ignored, and England became a Protestant country, a country of Protestant lighthouses. Although the nobles are so dissatisfied with the inheritance system, they can only hold their noses and endure it. This is a universal value. The entire English society has always been based on the primogeniture system. Whether it is a commoner or aristocrat, the commoners have at least distant relatives who can inherit the family property, while the nobles can only hand it over to the royal family, and the family is removed from the Bureau of Heraldry for the next time. The ministers fell silent, and the atmosphere in the conference room made people feel uneasy. Honorable Speaker, I have a proposal, don't you know? Sir Kyle Lands, who was sitting at the bottom, stood up and looked at the other ministers weakly, his eyes wandering, looking a little timid. Of course, Your Excellency, this is the chamber of the Privy Council. You have the right to make proposals. Lord Ferrers smiled slightly, gave him a positive look, and said softly, I think that among the nobles, the lack of male heirs is the main reason for the disappearance of titles. Kyle Lance straightened his back, and he looked a little imposing. Like a minister should. All the ministers sitting there said the same sentence in their minds, but they still listened attentively. In my opinion, we are going to solve the thinness of male heirs, and the heirs are weak. Then we will expand the scope of heirs and include more men in the heir list. After the last sentence was finished, the other ministers sat up straight one after another, looking directly at Kyle Lands, and all their attention was focused on him. Feeling the attention of all the ministers, Kyle Langston felt that this taste was particularly pleasant. His heart was congested, and his thighs trembled slightly. Continue, Your Excellency. The smile on Ferris's face suddenly spread. I think we can't limit the scope of inheritance to the immediate family, but can extend it to the paternal line. Within 5 generations only with the same great-grandfather, male members can be included in the scope of inheritance, so the probability of the title disappearing is much reduced. The more Kyle Lance spoke, the more confident he became, and the louder he spoke. Good. The other ministers were silent for a while, lost in thought, while His Excellency Ferris applauded first, and the entire Parliament immediately burst into applause. This is really a good proposal. Your Excellency Kyle Lands, this is a genius idea. Immediately, there were praises one after another in the conference room, which made Kyle Lance a little embarrassed. In this case, everyone agrees with Mr. Kyle Lance's proposal. Then, Mr. Kyle Lands, yes, Your Excellency the Speaker. Kyle Lance bowed and responded, Sir, since you proposed this proposal, it is up to you to draft it. You hand it in tomorrow, and I will submit it to His Majesty the King. Of course, Your Excellency Speaker, this is my honor. A smile instantly appeared on Kyle Lance's face. Every joint in his body seemed to be jumping, the muscles on his face were trembling, and his whole body was shining brightly. The next day, Edward personally received the Speaker of the Privy Council and Minister Kyle Lands, and after reading the bill, he expressed his satisfaction. Gentlemen, I think this proposal is good, but there are some problems that make me a little confused. Seeing His Majesty's friendly smile, Ferris Alexander and Kyle Lance immediately bowed and saluted. Of course, Your Majesty, this is the responsibility of our Privy Council. Please instruct. Ferris responded, if the heir is found from the collateral line, what is the status of the nobility of the extinct heir? Also, if the extinct noble has a daughter, how will the daughter's interests be guaranteed? Edward looked at the two of them and asked sentence by sentence. The more they asked, the two became a little nervous, and their eyes began to communicate with each other. Seeing the dumb and nervous expressions of the two, Edward knew that the two of them definitely hadn't thought of this aspect. In that case, it's up to me to decide. In this way, Edward spoke out what was in his heart. After collateral succession, after inheriting the title, you must recognize the extinct noble as your father, and from then on, you will no longer have any connection with the previous family. If you die again, you can no longer adopt, and the title will be revoked. After adopting a male heir, if the extinct noble has a daughter, then her daughter will enjoy half of the land and property, and she has the absolute right to own and use it freely. In folk, knights, jazz, and gentleman families, if there is no male heir, a male is selected from the family to inherit the land and title, and the daughter will not get half a dime of the property, unless the father buys a dowry for her early. Chapter 348, Stubborn Index Finger. In this way, after some deletions, the new Noble Succession Act was officially released, and it was unanimously approved by the House of Lords and the House of Commons, and then promulgated throughout England. There is nothing for the folks. After all, this law is about the nobles, and they don't have the heart to meddle in such nosy matters. And in Oxfordshire, a place with fertile soil and rich farmland, not only the royal family owns a lot of land here, but also the church and nobles are entrenched here due to the prolific food production here. Baron Brad's mansion. A debate is going on right now. The old Baron Brad, with a sallow complexion, pale lips, and withered yellow hair, was lying on the side of the bed, trembling all over, with his eyelids slightly open, gasping for breath, and his whole body seemed to be trembling. His right hand was stretched out, and his index finger seemed to be pointing somewhere. Everyone took a look. It was a pair of armor in the bedroom, and next to the armor was the heraldic flag of the Brad family. Regarding this, everyone was silent. The family, Your Excellency, the Baron is still worried about the Brad family. The White Horse Valley area is where most of Oxford's arable land is located, and Baron Brad is one of the largest landowners in the White Horse Valley area of Oxford. How to say? The Brad family owns more than a dozen manors, large and small, with an area of 100 square kilometers. If you ride a bicycle, you need to walk for half a day. The huge land allows him to possess unimaginable wealth. There are more than 10,000 mu of arable land alone, and the grain produced can meet the half-year rations of Oxfordshire people. The Brad family, rooted in the White Horse Valley area, has a huge network of contacts and relationships in the White Horse Valley and the entire Oxfordshire. Even in this era of declining aristocracy, the Brad family is still very powerful. Brad, the Baron, is not afraid of the sheriff and the county government representing the royal power. The Brad family has its own castle, and, despite being restricted by the royal family, the Baron still has hundreds of well-trained private soldiers. It can be said that in Oxfordshire, apart from the government, the blood family is the biggest force. It's a pity that this nobleman, who has been passed down for hundreds of years, has encountered a difficult hurdle today. The elderly Baron Brad, who was 43 years old this year, was sick and unable to move, and most fatally, he did not have a male heir. There are no sons or nephews, only two pretty daughters at the moment when his life was about to die. The chief of the county, Seymour, the county lieutenant, William, the supervisor, Will, and because of the Baron, the Heraldry Bureau specially dispatched Commissioner Tottle. The four of them stayed silently by the bed, with sad expressions on their faces, bowed their heads, whispered to each other from time to time, and then looked at His Excellency the Baron on the bed, as if they were waiting for something. And if you look carefully, you will find that the four of them don't have much sadness at all, and the expressions on their faces are just acting. That's right, it's not about friends or relatives, it's just a strange Baron lying on the bed, a Baron lingering on his last breath, going to see God at any time. The Baron's wife and two daughters were sitting by the bed crying, wiping the tears from the corners of their eyes with a handkerchief from time to time. Their eyes were dim, they were sobbing sadly, and the clothes were wet with tears. John, what do you want us to do after you leave? The flesh on the Baroness's face was squeezed into a ball, and her eyes were squeezed into a slit. Tears flowed out of the narrow slit. It can be seen that she is indeed very sad. The two aristocratic ladies did not have the brilliance and air of the past, with panic and sadness intertwined on their faces, looking decadent. In the final analysis, they are nothing more than teenage girls. Their usual prestige is only through their father's power, but now they are showing their true state. Hearing his wife's sad words, Baron Brad's eyes widened and he made a babbling sound, but he didn't form a word. But his index finger was still pointing at the flag. The flag with the Brad family crest looked so stubborn, and stubborn. Seeing this, the three women cried even more sadly, and His Excellency the Sheriff looked at the finger raised by His Excellency the Baron, and felt something different in his heart. He took a step forward, glanced at the flag, and looked at the group of Baron. Madam, comforted softly, Mom, my condolences, all this is arranged by my lord. I only hope that your Excellency the Baron will serve my lord in heaven, and don't have to suffer from illness anymore. I don't doubt that he is enjoying happiness in heaven, but what will happen to me and my two daughters if he leaves like this? Suffering will befall the three of us, O Almighty Lord. As he spoke, he seemed to be imagining the poverty life that his mother and daughter would face after spending all the private money they accumulated in the past, and after leaving the aristocratic class, they lived next to the common people. Thinking of this, the Baroness felt sad, and the water in the slit was flowing faster and faster, and the poor Lord Baron also seemed to anticipate the future life of his wife and daughter, and felt extremely regretful in his heart. In the past few years, he had not prepared private property for his wife and daughter in advance, and as a result, when he fell ill, it was too late to buy it. Although His Excellency the Sheriff comforted the Baroness, he was thinking about how to transfer this fertile land to the royal family in a smooth manner, so as to gain points in front of His Majesty the King. The Special Commissioner of the Bureau of Heraldry on the side kept the quill in his hand on the column of the Brad family that he was flipping through in front of him, and was about to cross out the family crest and family name. Lord Lieutenant and His Excellency Supervisor, like His Excellency the Sheriff, acted as witnesses to confirm the demise of the Brad family. A family that has been around for hundreds of years is about to be cut off, and the county chief and the others can't help feeling a little regretful. Baron Brad, who was lying on the bed, naturally knew the consequences, so he has been reluctantly supporting himself. Wanting to prolong the time of family destruction, time passed slowly. The Baroness and her two daughters, together with the sheriff and others, patiently waited for the final result, also to witness this rare moment. Madam, just as the Baron was about to leave, a hurried voice came from afar. Everyone in the room raised their heads and looked towards the door where the voice came from. They saw a man in his 40s, wearing a butler's clothes, his face flushed, and he couldn't stop panting, "Mom, my lords." After calming down the emotions in his heart, the butler finally realized his identity, bowed to everyone, and said softly, the smile on the face opened, as bright as a chrysanthemum, which made people feel happy unconsciously. News came from London. His Majesty the King promulgated a new inheritance law, allowing males within 5 generations of the family to adopt the main branch and inherit the title. The housekeeper spoke quickly, but enunciated clearly, and let everyone understand the meaning at once. Has Parliament approved it? After listening, a smile appeared on the Baroness's face, like a pleated chrysanthemum, which was a bit unacceptable. The sheriff at the side reacted and asked a point. The House of Lords and the House of Commons have approved it. It was approved yesterday. Today, notices have been posted in major cities in Oxford. That's wonderful, God bless. The Baroness quickly wiped away the tears from the corners of her eyes, and the Baron, who was lying on the bed, finally closed his eyes, but still pointed his index finger stubbornly at the flag. Chapter 349, England and number 039, hard-pressed colonial history. In fact, colonizing Ireland was a last resort for England after all. Rabbits don't eat grass beside their nests. Not only the Chinese understand it, but the English also understand it. Long before the large-scale colonization of Ireland, the English had their sights set beyond Europe. In the early days of the Tudor dynasty, during the period of Henry VIII, this is the first time the English explored abroad. According to historical records, this expedition was an overseas expedition for the purpose of finding gold and silver mines. In July 1480, at that time, the British navigators set off from the port of Bristol and went to the west of Ireland to find the legendary Brashear Island. According to the legend, it is rich in mahogany, which is a very precious dye required by the woolen industry, but the hard-working English returned without success as expected. But it made the port of Bristol an important base for English navigators and expeditions. In the 1580s and 1590s, the English continued to carry out expeditions, but they all ended in failure, which greatly dampened the English people's desire for exploration at this time. Spain and Portugal have reaped a lot. The Portuguese bypassed the Cape of Good Hope, opened up a new route to India, and entered the east, reaching Japan and the Ming Empire. The Spaniards crossed the Atlantic Ocean, discovered America, and aggressively expanded their colonies. Shiploads of gold and silver were continuously transported from the Americas to Spain, supporting the first generation of the empire on which the sun never sets. More importantly, in May 1493, under the arbitration of Pope Alexander VI, Spain and Portugal divided the boundaries of the colonies, established a meridian 100 leagues west of the Azores and Cape Verde Islands as the dividing line, and assigned all lands west of this line to Spain, and all lands east to Portugal. The intuitive point is that in South America, except for Brazil, the Portuguese are not allowed to enter, and the vast African and Asian regions belong to Portugal. As a result, there were very few areas that England could explore. As seen at the time, in order to reach Asia and find the Eastern Empire, the English believed that there were only two ways. One is to start from the northeast direction, that is, the road to Russia, pass through the North Pole, and thus reach the east. The second is to start from the northwest, that is, the direction of North America, so as to reach the east. In 1496, the Venetian adventurer John Cabot had an audience with Henry VIII in an attempt to pass the northwest route and occupy some undiscovered lands for the king. Therefore, Henry VIII granted a charter to the Cabots and his sons, giving them the privilege of exploring overseas, and asked all Englishmen to help the Cabots and his sons in their expeditions. Therefore, the Cabot and his sons carried the banner of the King of England, and in accordance with the authorization of Henry VIII, take a boat to the east coast, west coast and north coast of the Pacific Ocean. You can't go to the south coast, so as not to conflict with Spanish interests. For the development and exploration of all areas. For Christians, any place that is unknown, barbaric, and inhabited by pagans, islands, countries, districts, or provinces, wherever they may be in the world, conquer and occupy any town, castle, city, island they find capable of ruling. It can be said that this is the first clear expression of the principle of effective occupation that Britain insisted on during its colonial expansion. Since then, all colonial expansions have been based on this standard. The fleet led by Cabot and his son arrived in Newfoundland, where cod and other European best-selling marine products are abundant, and then planted the flag of the British royal family. Then sailed to a certain corner of the coast of North America the second time, in 1498. Cabot discovered Greenland, Baffin Island, the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and Maryland for England, but Cabot disappeared and died in all likelihood after the death of John Cabot. His son Sebastian Cabot continued to receive the support of the English royal family. In the early 16th century, he continued to explore North America and discovered Addison Bay for England. It should be said that the most beneficial thing is the discovery of Newfoundland, a large fishing ground, which not only created a lot of wealth for England, but also cultivated European ocean-going sailors. Although the big-mouthed John Cabot told Henry VIII the Newfoundland fishing ground for the first time, he revealed it to the kings of Portugal and Spain, so that England could not monopolize the Newfoundland fishing ground. In Spain, Portugal, the Netherlands, and England, all warships are equipped with crews trained from Newfoundland, and there is even such a rumor: a fleet without Newfoundland fishermen can never be a first-class fleet. But generally speaking, the expedition of England's Northwest Passage was a failure for the people at that time. If the Northwest fails, turn to the Northeast. In 1548, London merchants tried to find a way to sail eastward from the Arctic region, found a route, and reached the east. Just failed. However, in 1553, Sir Hugh Willoughby and Richard Chancellor, funded by commercial companies, led a fleet to the North Pole in search of a route to the east. Of course, Edward was aware of this and acquiesced. Of course, he knew that this voyage would definitely not find a route to China. The North Pole is too cold, and under the current conditions, it is impossible to reach the east. But Edward still issued letters of credence in Latin, Greek and other languages, and sent letters to the monarchs of the countries along the way, saying that he was only here for trade and peace. Is it ironic? And asked for asylum. In this way, Sir Winslow went to the Arctic region with confidence and boldness to make a contribution to England. The eastern route is not the goal, but Russia and Eastern Europe are Edward's goal. This voyage will definitely pass through Russia and Eastern Europe, thus finding a new trade route for England. Finding Russia not only opened up a new market for England, but more importantly, it allowed England to act as a second-hand dealer and obtain a lot of benefits at a small cost. For example, Russia's wax, cattle and sheep, timber, animal fur and other commodities are under the monopoly of England, which has brought huge benefits to England. Moreover, England can also open up the market in Eastern Europe. This business is really great. A while ago, news came from Russia that Richard Chandler had arrived in Russia and entrusted a businessman from Eastern Europe to bring a letter to England. In the letter, he briefly introduced his experience. He lost contact with Sir Willow in a strong wind, and when he was driving along the coast of Russia, he learned that Russian fishermen had discovered Sir Willow's frozen body corpse. Moreover, he promised that after arriving in Moscow, he would sign a commercial treaty with the tyrant Ivan IV to fulfill the king's entrustment. Chapter 350 Wenger Town in Ireland. After waking up early, Leonard looked out of the foggy window, then at his wife, who was also dressed in the same clothes, and said with a soft smile, "Anna, today is a good day. I'm afraid I'm going to be busy again." In the more than a month since he came here in Ireland, Leonard has gotten used to life here. Unlike the comfort and stability in England, Wengertown is full of busyness and danger even in broad daylight. Not many people dared to leave their residence 5 miles away. Although there were Irish tribes close to England, their personal safety was still not guaranteed. Traps, wild wolves, and all kinds of poisonous snakes and spiders are enough to scare the people of the gentle town who lack supplies. And according to the rumors that Leonard heard from the old man, even last year, tribes that were still hostile in broad daylight came to make a surprise attack, causing many immigrants to die. Therefore, although Leonard is a little uncomfortable, he is grateful. Fortunately, he came here this year, God bless. By this time, busy and fulfilling labor occupied most of his time, and he had no time to worry about religious belief. Leonard, be careful. Remember to run if you are in danger. His wife Anna, with a hint of worry on her face, said softly, "It's nothing, Anna." Leonard comforted her by kissing her forehead. Today, there are militiamen led by the left behind adults for protection, and the chance of encountering danger is very small. After saying this, Leonard put on his coat, gently opened the door, and walked out. Before leaving, he walked to the room of his daughter and son, took a longing look, and then left firmly. When he first arrived, after a few days, because of his literacy, he was lucky and did not have to open up land and do heavy work like other immigrants. Instead, he was assigned to the kind administrator as an assistant. It seems easy to do calculations, record things with a pen, run errands, and supervise the immigration work. Today is different. Recently, it is the rye harvest season. In the barren Ireland, food is the most important product. Every 6 months, Sir John, who stayed behind, would go to Dublin with the harvested grain, not only to pay taxes, but also to exchange a large amount of necessities with the exclusive merchants of the royal family, such as iron, weapons and salt. And those Irish tribes who are pro-British will use animal fur, sheep and cattle, etc., to Wengertown to exchange food, salt, and cloth to meet their daily needs. Therefore, May and October every year are important harvest seasons. During this period, everyone has to put down their work and join the ranks of harvesting. Sir John, on the other hand, led dozens of people to constantly patrol around the cultivated land, preventing any animals and hostile tribes from coming to raid. Leaving his humble house, Leonard came to the grain drying field, which is the square in the center of Wengertown. This is a place for drying grain and a place for Anglican missions. Along the way, when meeting familiar people, Leonard greeted him. Wengertown was quite friendly to the administrator's new assistant. After walking for nearly half a mile, Leonard came to the drying field. At this time, the fog had dissipated, revealing the sun in the sky. One after another, people came and gathered here. After a cursory glance, there were about 1,000 people, and there were many strong women among them. His wife, Anna, was assigned to weave wool because of unfamiliarity. When the fog completely disappeared, all the people who participated in the harvesting operation had arrived, and Sir John had already arrived with dozens of militiamen. Everyone, more than a month from today is the busiest period in Wengertown. Harvesting food, opening up wasteland and growing food are all your tasks. Sir John stood imposingly ahead, mobilizing loudly. Whether it is a new immigrant or an old immigrant, you have to work. You must know that this is working for His Majesty the King, and you are paying off your debts. After 10 years, you will get your own land, which can truly free. Remember, the prerequisite for freedom is to work hard. After some mobilization, Sir John led the way slowly, on horseback, with a militiaman. Afterwards, everyone left Wengertown and came to the mature rye field outside the town. The ears of wheat bent down together were heavy, which made people feel happy. The light brown ears of wheat are the characteristics of rye. Thousands of acres of rye fields, seen from a distance, are gray and magnificent. The origin of rye is because its flour is black, so it gets its name, not its appearance. Leonard went to manage the place and got a sickle. Under the assignment of the housekeeper, he and 9 other people came to a wheat field with a large area of about 10 acres. This is their day's workload, and it may even seem like onerous. However, one advantage is that there are 3 meals in the town, unlimited, and they also bring some mutton soup from time to time to supplement their physical strength. Bending down and looking at the rye about 3 feet high, Leonard understood that the land was fairly fertile, and the straw was so tall after only a few years of land reclamation. And you must know that in England, rye grown on medium-sized land may not necessarily grow so well, which shows that this land is very good. Holding the sickle, Leonard, together with 9 other people, started working life. Things that seemed simple were arduous to do. After one morning, his hands were already red, swollen, and even bleeding. My arms felt sore and painful as if they were tied with stones, and my waist was even more sore and unbearable when eating lunch. Take a short break to relieve your tired body. Holding a wooden bowl, Leonard and other immigrants came to the river next to the cultivated land, and when they were about to scoop water to quench their thirst, someone had already stopped them by the small river, prohibiting them from scooping water, and slowly, dozens of people gathered by the river. Leonard saw that they were all new immigrants, and the atmosphere gradually became tense. After a busy morning, it is so unreasonable not to even allow water to drink. Everyone restrained their physical fatigue and protested quietly. Everyone, according to the regulations, all immigrants are not allowed to drink the river water. The interceptors watched the new immigrants gather, not nervous at all, but calmly and loudly preached, "Why can't I drink water? I'm thirsty." Discussions sounded immediately. After a while, someone will bring cold boiled water from the town, and everyone can drink it to their heart's content. Now, let's use the time to rest for a while. After all, there is only 1 hour to rest at noon. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.